Welcome. The board has been in closed session since 6 o'clock. There's 7 board members present, and we have been discussing 3 items in closed session. First is collective negotiating matters between the public body and its employees or their representatives, or deliberations concerning salary schedules for 1 or more classes of employees. 2, the appointment, employment, compensation, discipline, performance, or dismissal of specific employees of the public body. And 3rd, approval of February 27, 2018 closed session minutes. Could we rise for the pledge? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Tonight we have 2 Shining Star recognitions. I will do one of them, and Margaret, you have one also. Would you like me to start? Okay, I'm going to start with the first one. So we have Lauren Blandford. Okay, Lauren was nominated by Lindsay Sloan and the Emerson staff, and these are the words that they had to say about her. Lauren is a huge asset to everyone at Emerson. She is always willing to lend a helping hand on topics ranging from integrating technology into the classroom, planning for lessons, or answering an overall question about an appropriate book. Whenever you ask her for help, she immediately jumps on board. Not only is Lauren an amazing resource to the staff at Emerson, she is one of the biggest assets to the students. She is always so happy to see the kids, welcomes them to the library, and plans exciting and engaging activities for them to do. Despite the many different grade levels and number of students she sees each week, Lauren readily knows all their names and special needs. She goes above and beyond to support the students, from helping to hang signs on the walls for Science Olympiad, to preparing the 3rd graders for the park test, to cheering on Emerson's 3rd, 4th, and 5th graders as they ran their first 5K, to preparing a full day of STEAM activities for the school, to getting student resources such as play always. Lauren does it all. So thank you.
I love all of these positive things where we can take a time and recognize our staff for all the great things that they do every day. This Shining Star Award goes out to Bob Bloss, a York teacher. I don't think Bob is in the audience. Yes, he is! Please come up. And Bob was nominated by Dave Moyer. In the past, teachers were paid a stipend to tutor high school students during final. This stipend was eventually cut. However, Bob showed up and volunteered his time anyway. Bob's commitment to continuing to assist students during a stressful time on his own time and without pay demonstrates his ethics and exemplifies the culture the district hopes to reflect. In addition, Bob is the sponsor of the Eco Club at York. Last semester, the Eco Club had many new programs and activities taking place, and old ones that are continuing. Every year, the ECO makes holiday decorations for the residents at the Elmhurst Extended Care Nursing Home. In addition, the ECO Club has a plan to build 50 new birdhouses to be put in Starved Rock State Park. The pinnacle of the ECO Club's accomplishment this past semester was the revival of their recycling program. In previous years, not enough people were willing to participate. This year, however, a surprising number of students have volunteered for it. All of this taking place under the direction of Bob. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. The next section is public comments, and the board will receive public comments for up to three minutes. And we have 3 names here on the speakers list. And I'd like to start with Debbie Lagar. Thank you.
Can you hear me? Yeah. Hello, thank you for allowing me to speak tonight. My name is Debbie Laguerre, and I am a parent of an Edison School second grader, and I am concerned about the possibility of large class size next year in the 3rd grade at Edison and across the district. We know your job is difficult. As Jim Collins stated in 2013, you deal with everything from unfunded state and federal mandates to deteriorating buildings to dramatic increases in the special needs student populations. That being said, class size is important. A class size approaching 30 students is too large. I am a teacher at an elementary school in LaGrange. I have taught 600 kids for over 28 years. You cannot convince me that class size does not matter. I've been in the trenches and I know it matters. I've read studies on class size, Starr, John Hattie, etc. Arguments can be made for each side of this issue. The idea that class size doesn't matter goes against common sense and against my own experience. From a social-emotional perspective, students suffer in classes that are too large. There is more bullying and less of a sense of belonging. I believe that initiatives such as bully prevention programs, a discussion of grit or growth mindset, are band-aids on the actual injury of class sizes that are too large. In a large class, the teacher is less able to be a guide and is forced to do crowd control. It is hard to convince teachers who are stretched too thin to try innovative teaching techniques. Large class sizes put teachers and students in an overwhelming position while also adjusting to new math and reading curricula. Students with IEP and 504 education plans require extra time and attention both for meetings and individual student accommodations. We are concerned that the average student may get lost in the shuffle and left behind. Most of our kids fall into this range. We are fully aware that class size is an issue across the district. Last fall, Jackson School had to add an additional section significantly after the school year began. This mess was avoidable and should not be repeated. Many of us have moved to Elmhurst and have paid a great deal in property taxes because we support strong public schools. We are passionate about our schools, and we support school board members and administrators who make decisions that are student-centered and actually include the community in decision-making. We do not think that class sizes approaching 30 students lead to strong public schools. The 360 phone survey in the fall found that the #2 top priority for Elmhurst residents is class size. Edison School has been a wonderful school, and 205 has been a wonderful district. Putting more students into a class is not the way to save money. Please be student-centered in your decision-making. We would like this issue to be on the next agenda for the next board meeting. We hope to work with you until we resolve the issue together before the beginning of the school year. We are here to work and come up with solutions together. We leave this in your capable hands to make the best decision for our Edison family and the entire community of Elmhurst. Thank you for listening.
Thank you. I forgot to mention also that at this time, the board doesn't respond to public comments, but we do follow up at a later time. So thank you. Next is Stephen Schlesinger.
Good evening. My name is Stephen Schlesinger. My comments tonight are of a concerned parent wanting to address what seems like an avoidable hurdle, such as high class sizes impacting not only my child, but other numerous in the district increasing regularity. In short, class size matters. I did want to take a moment to thank Dr. Moyer for responding to a letter that was sent to him this past weekend, as well as the board. It was put together by other concerned second grade parents at Edison, of which you just heard from one. We had approximately 95% of the second grade parents represented who plan to be a part of the district next year in that letter, some of which have come tonight. And I would ask to please stand if they are concerned about the class size, as well as other parents in the room. Thank you. I venture to guess when we expand our concern more broadly, a significant portion of the parents in the district, as well as the community, will find interest. In your response, Dr. Moore, you referenced neither being sure of what was said nor what context was provided in 2006. I have brought a copy of the 2006 referendum. Should you wish to leverage that, and it would provide clarity to you of the community expectations. I'm also willing to email it to you if you prefer an electronic copy. Furthermore, you highlighted past decisions in which the board modified classroom targets in 2011. It might be helpful if you share what community outreach and analysis was performed to drive what appears to be ever-increasing targets. As you stated, there were difficulties in the past with budgets. However, in your feedback, this does not appear to be the case today, given the consistency of achieving a balanced budget and the reasonable surplus highlighted. We acknowledge long-term plans are necessary and expect you to perform those duties. Our concern remains with the start of next school year. Our concern is in the short term, August of this year, which was absent in your response. We were pleased to hear you state that you make every effort in keeping class sizes small. We now want to see action prior to August of this year. As we asked in our letter, what cost reduction measures have been taken to address specific gaps, such as our children being placed in very high classroom sizes? In taking every effort to keep classrooms small, we assume these actions will be critical. Furthermore, in your response, you stated only 7.6% of the classrooms in grades 3 through 5 have 27 students or more. Across the district, it would appear approximately 3 teachers would fill this gap. This seems positive, as it does not appear to take much to resolve our concern given the considerable budget and even the surplus highlighted. Based on your numbers, why is it that our children have to experience this negative experience when it appears something can and should be done? We are looking for a strategic mindset rather than a reactionary stance when classroom sizes K through 5 are approaching 30 students. We also are not convinced anything above 24 in K through 5 grades is consistent with leading practices when comparing ourselves to peers. Many of the accomplishments you highlighted were worth being proud of and took years to achieve. As I looked at the numerous highlights of the high school students, it dawned on me that many of those students obviously benefited from small classroom sizes as they went through the 205 district. We want our students to not only achieve those that you highlighted, but increase the list. This is where you can help. There should be no stronger advocate for children than their parents. It is our hope that the second strongest will be the superintendent. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Robin?
Hi, my name is Robin Petschel, and I'm here again tonight to talk about the inequity on the north side of Elmhurst. To say I'm frustrated to be up here again is an understatement. Let's begin tonight with math intervention at Churchville. At Bryan and Sandberg, their math intervention takes place during their acceleration period, and they are able to help Tier 2 and Tier 3 students at this time. At Churchville during acceleration, they're only able to help Tier 3 math students. Any Tier 2 math students may stay after school to receive help, but this does not always work out for students and families. It has also come to my attention during the other schools' interventions for math and reading, the class sizes are considerably smaller than what they are at Churchville. So their students are not only getting help if they need it during the school day, but they are getting more face time due to smaller class sizes with their teacher during said time. The district saying is all means all. Yes, all of the students at the other schools. But if you go to this school, all means if we have the resources to help you, and right now, there's not enough. Stop telling me my children have the same opportunities that they would elsewhere in the district, because obviously they don't. Stop acting like you don't know how to close the learning and test scores gap, because step one is by fixing this. The fact that our children do not receive the same services and the same quality of services as their peers elsewhere needs to end. Now, let's talk about CAT members. The group you have formed, despite claiming it is not balanced. It in no way represents me and many other district residents. In a recent communication, it was said a rubric was used to form this group. So, was it intentional with this rubric to have one middle school, Churchville, only have 5 representatives, while another middle school had 12? Or for Fisher to be the lowest represented Brave school with just 2 people? Or how about how Madison only has 1 representative? How was the rubric used, and the end result is a disproportionate representation of our town? May I also point out, not a single member from my own age group was chosen either. Not one person under the age of 35 could be found to join this group. Why don't you want taxpayers and voters in their 20s and early 30s involved? They have or will have children that will be going to our schools. And I'm pretty sure they're going to have to pay the taxes, unless we get to be exempt with them, because I'm cool with that. I want to hear from my peers and my neighbors about the referendum and that it's a good plan, and I want them to convince me to love it. Not people on the other side of town whose children are getting the services ours are not, despite being equally deserving.
Okay, thanks. That's all I have for public comments tonight. Okay, are there any others? We'll move to reports and presentations. The first item is Community Advisory Team and Community Engagement Update. Marcia Sutter, thanks.
Thank you all for having me back again. I fear you're going to get tired of me. Tonight we're here to talk about the community engagement, communication process, and timeline. So tonight's really an update. So a couple things that we want to cover tonight are a progress update, information on timelines, how we're going to be updating the board on this process, and we also want to start defining expectations. So it's kind of a royal we, because Malia is not here tonight, nor is my partner, Leslie. But I think the first thing that you'll notice on this slide is a new logo for this process. We've already started branding it. This logo will be used to identify all the materials for this phase of the work. And I think you can see it contains elements of the district logo, the Focus 205 logo, because that's really where this project kicked off. And it also reflects the district's beliefs and operational plans. Future-focused, empowering students for success, and that's also all right here on the wall. So this is really a reminder slide. You saw it last time I presented. It's the work that you authorized us to do when we were here in late February, which was to move ahead with steps 1 through 5 of this process. We're only going to talk about the first 3 tonight, and I'm actually going to work backwards through them. So the third thing that we were authorized to do is to go ahead and start updating staff about the master facility plan, because they are key communicators. Dr. Moyer has already begun that work. He's been talking to district office staff, updating staff when he visits their buildings, and I believe you also shared this with the district leadership team. So The community advisory team was one of the things that you authorized us to go ahead and do. So we, right after the last time we all gathered together, we began the process of recruiting people to join that team. And just as a reminder, their job is to help us ensure that communications that go out to the community are clear. Their job is not to vet the plan. So how did we go about recruiting people? We sent invitations to people who were suggested by building administrators and district administrators. We posted it on the district website and did a dedicated email to everyone who's on the district's mailing list. And there was also a story in the local press about it, so it actually reached everyone in the greater Elmhurst community. We received 126 applications in approximately the 10 days that the process was open. We selected 33 people out of that group, and I'm going to go into a little bit more about who's in that group and how they were selected in a minute. But our goal was a balanced representational team that could help us with the work that needs to be done before we can take this plan, this master facility plan, out to the community. And in fact, based on that high interest, we increased the size of the team. We had originally been shooting for 18 to 20. One of the board members suggested that we might need more to get full representation of the community, and we agreed. So we upped it to 25, and then based on that level of interest, we actually cranked it up to 30. So who's on that team? The first thing I want to say, in case you're pulling out your pencils to add up the number of people who represent each school, many people represent more than one school. Some people have children at those schools. Some people attended those schools. So they're not going to add up to 33 no matter what calculator you use. So who's on the team? 2/3 of them are female, 1/3 are male. That represents approximately the ratio in the applications we received. We do have representatives of every school. Only one person from Madison applied, to be honest. We heard that question already tonight, so I can address it right now. We have parents of pre-K through grade 12 students. We have District 205 graduates and parents of District 205 graduates. We have the PTA, and Foundation represented. Athletics and Fine Arts at York are represented. We have former and current district staff, educators from other districts who are residents of the Elmhurst community who've been through similar processes in their professional work. And that leads me to the diverse group of professions and jobs that are represented in that 33 people. We did try and look for people who had communication expertise, and some of the people work and live in Elmhurst, and some just live in Elmhurst and work elsewhere. 24 of the people are aged 35 to 49. The balance are 50 plus. In fact, no one under 35, to the best of my knowledge, applied for that. We also have 2 members who have lived in Elmhurst for less than 2 years. And I just want to say that we were really impressed by the number of people who applied to be part of this group. So we had our first meeting last night. We went over the goals. Obviously, everyone introduced themselves, and I'm going to say I was truly impressed by the number of people who graduated from the Elmhurst Public Schools or are married to people who graduated from the Elmhurst Public Schools. It really, as someone who doesn't live here, really spoke to me about how engaged people feel with your district. So introduction, we reviewed the purpose and goals, which were to make sure that the plan is clear and effective and to help us anticipate the questions of community members. Dr. Moyer presented a preview of the work, the master facility plan work that's been done to date, and we're conducting an exit survey with that group to help us refine the presentation. Not all the information that's going to be shared is information that's been presented to the board in the past. We're going to have our second meeting on April 23rd, and at that time we'll be closer to having a presentation ready to go out to the full community. So we want to get their feedback on that. That presentation will also include what we learn at the focus groups. So we promised you timelines. Here you go. So I know this is almost impossible to read. So the big takeaways from this are that the Focus 205 team was formed in 2015, I think just about 3 years ago this month. So that's when your district decided to really go ahead and begin this process. You've been ramping up to it. And if you look at all those colored dots in the middle, that's where we are now. The board has had 4 meetings devoted to this process, 5, I think, if you count this one. We've got, I'm going to go into these details later, but the reason that's there is because these are your 2.5 months to really focus on community engagement. We're ending right now with the November 2018 election. I know that that is not a date that is set in stone. We're going to also discuss some options for that, but we really want to help you do it. If that is what you want to do, we want to make sure that you are prepared to do it. So that is why that date is on there. So I promised you a few more details about all those colored dots. So here we are in March. What's happened so far in March? The dedicated webpage to the master facility plan has gone live. The master facility plan has been included in all district communications. A logo's been introduced. The CAT team has been recruited and had their first meeting. And we have an annual report in development. And I understand that this is a new type of communication. You've had similar print communiques to your district. So really what that is, and this is not yours, it is a mailing to everyone in your district, and it's going to highlight district successes. It's going to provide budget information, and it's going to provide facility information. One of the things I know from doing this work for so many years, and even from talking to CAT members last night, people don't have a firm grasp of the school budgeting process. It's very complicated. I think you're lucky that you have Chris and Dr. Moyer who can help you understand that. So an annual report's going to include some graphs like this, and I know they're hard to see. Happy to share them with you guys afterwards, that are really going to explain where school funding comes from, primarily local property taxes, and where it's spent, primarily on education, which includes salary and benefits for all of your staff. So we've got presentations and discussion guides for the community conversations in development. We're talking about the timelines now, right here at this meeting. And a couple things I want to just say about the materials that are being developed and the timetables you're going to see tonight. All of this is based on what we know now, what we know tonight. We may need to pivot, we may need to be flexible if we learn something in a focus group or something happens in the community. So, excuse me, we're going to work with all of our planning partners if we need to make any changes. And equally important, the community will know when they look at these plans that they are preliminary plans, that the district is seeking their input. They are not seeking approval of final plans. They're looking for input to improve the information that's being presented to them. So in other words, it's all a work in progress. So looking ahead to next month, we are almost there since spring break is just about upon us. In April, we'll continue to update the webpage and district communication, and then we're going to start developing a set of FAQs, frequently asked questions. So those are very detailed. They'll be available to people online. They're going to address the questions and concerns that we've already heard from community members, questions and concerns raised in focus groups and meetings. And they are really the bedrock, the Bible of this process. They're going to have everything in there. We're still going to have a 1-paragraph version, We're still going to have a one-page version, and we're going to have a whole bunch of things other in between, but that will be the most detailed set of information available to people, and it will probably only be available online due to its length. It's also a really great way to show that the district is listening to the concerns that are raised by your constituents. Moving on, the annual report should be delivered in April, and we'll be doing focus groups at Lincoln Field and Edison, and we are working on the format for those right now. Typically a focus group is rather small, even fewer people than are sitting at the board table right now, and we really want to be inclusive. So we are looking to develop another kind of future-focused community conversation that will allow everyone who's interested to participate rather than having to say, it's not your turn today. So we'll get back to you on the specific format of those. And next month also we'll be updating the community presentation to reflect what we learned in focus groups and at last night's CAT meeting. And we will probably launch the first of 2 thought exchanges for this phase of the work. And that says focus on Edison. It will actually be focused on Lincoln, Edison, and Field, the 3 schools where we're having these conversations. May will be here before we know it. We'll continue to keep the web page and district communication, including those FAQs, updated. We'll be doing the larger community meetings, and so if you remember, those will be held at Sandburg, York, Churchville, and Bryan, 1 during the day, 3 at night. They'll include a presentation. There'll be a gallery walk of the boards. Again, we don't have all the details of that, but we do have the dates right there. And those will be followed up with an exit survey so we can gather feedback from people. We'll be launching the second thought exchange that month, and our thinking at this time is it will focus on boundary adjustments, but again, we're trying to be flexible so that we can make sure that we learn what we need to learn. We'll continue on into June with the web page and district communication. I sound like a broken record. We'll finish that second thought exchange. Then we're going to take everything we've learned. We're going to synthesize all of that data and prepare a report and bring that back to you on June 19th. So what would happen after you see that report? These are all potential activities because we don't know what you're going to decide then. But if you would like to be on the ballot in November, there are certain things you're going to have to do. So that would be draft a resolution. That would include probably working with your attorney, what exactly you're going to be asking the community for, confirm funding options, conduct a phone poll so you'll have some quantitative data, really what does the community think, and we recognize that summer people go out of town, and that is something that the research firm will deal with. They will make sure that they get a representative sample of the Elmhurst community if you guys decide to take that step. And then we will present what we learned from that, and that is the time when the board is really going to have to do some deep analysis and discussion. So just 2 key dates, and again, I'm really just glossing over this because you guys haven't made this commitment yet. There's going to be a board meeting scheduled for August 14th, and August 20th is the deadline to adopt a resolution if you determine that you would like to be on the ballot in November. But what if you decide you don't want to be on the ballot on November 6th, which is the gubernatorial general election? There's a few upcoming elections. You'll see that February 26th, which is the consolidated primary election, is grayed out. It is an election date. It's hard to get a school referendum on one of those ballots. There's certain criteria that you need to meet. But more importantly, I would say those are very low turnout elections. And if you put something on that ballot, I think people might be worried that you weren't giving them really their opportunity to vote, since so few people vote in those elections. So April 2nd, 2019 is the consolidated general election. That's when you're going to have, I believe it's 4 school board seats open, so having a referendum on those days can be an issue. And then due to the Illinois election schedule, you'd be looking at 2020. The presidential primary on March 17th and the presidential general election on the November 3rd. So just a quick reminder, typically high turnout elections are better, more favorable towards schools. So that's something that you would want to keep in mind. And another number of days that you'll want to keep in mind is 79, which is the number of days that you have prior to an election to approve a resolution. So we would be able to take the timeline I just talked about and adjust it based on the needs of District 205, the full community, and the board. So communication with the Board of Education, I just wanted to assure you that we will be hopefully not needing to present to you every month, but you'll get monthly updates which will review progress. What did we do the month before? And a look ahead. What's going on? Did we need to pivot? Did we need to make any changes? We know for sure that from our team, there'll be a presentation in June of those qualitative findings. And if you commission a phone poll, we'll come back to present that in July. But we are always here for questions and comments. So I mean that we didn't put our phone numbers and email addresses into the public packet, but we are here, Leslie and I, for phone calls, for emails, and for 1-by-1 and 2-by-2 meetings. You know, we're not going to be able to share information that is not being shared with the rest of the board, but it can be a really great way to get your questions addressed. So I did want to make it clear that we are always available for those. And now we're back to your favorite slide, the work sequence slide. So we've talked about updating staff, recruiting CAT, timelines, developing materials, and now we're going to talk about questions. And I think if you remember last month, we talked about one of the hallmarks of a successful community engagement is defined expectations. And tonight, I'm hoping that we're going to start crafting some questions and areas that you want to explore. So I'm going to turn the tables. I've been talking for a little while, and I'm going to ask you, what would you like to learn? Here's some examples of things that people have asked in previous community engagements. And I'd like each of you to just take a couple minutes, let the group know what you would like to learn. I'm going to take some notes, and then we're going to compile this information, and we're going to share it out to you for further reflection. And then we're also going to check in with White, Raymond James, ICI, and the admin team to find out what they want to learn. Our job is going to be to match these questions with the right ask. Should we be asking them in a focus group? Should we be asking them in a survey? And we'll fill you in when we have those questions answered. So when we do a focus group, we ask people not to repeat what the person before them said, but we do like them to acknowledge if they agreed with what the last person said. So if Kira says that she wants to know, is there a preference for a plan option when costs are included? If you, John, agree with that and you want to know that too, let me know so I can make sure that it's reflected that 2 board members want to know that. So I think, if it's okay with you and Shannon, I don't know how you want to ask people to share what they want to know, so I'll leave that to you.
Right. I have a question, though, outside of those questions that I wanted to clarify. Can we?
You want to do Q&A?
Yeah.
We could do Q&A before we do this. Mm-hmm. That is the next slide, is Q&A.
Oh, so see, that's coming up?
That's coming up after this. So if you want to switch the order, I'm fine with that.
That's fine. Just as long as there's an option for it.
I'll show you the slide.
Okay.
There you go.
Okay. So are you asking board members those questions?
I'm asking board members.
Okay.
We said, oh, sorry. Defined expectations are an important part of this. What does the board want to learn during the community engagement process? And I would like each of you to tell me tonight, just a thought starter of what you want to learn. I'm going to put all this information together and send it back out to you so that you can react to it again. I don't want to put you on the spot. But I think it would be good for the group to kind of work together on defining those expectations. We're starting to define materials. We have focus groups next month.
Clarifying question. Different than what we have discussed in previous meetings and sent already? Because we've discussed some of this, so I just want to get a context of how big or small or, where are we with this?
Right. So I would say as broad as you would like to be. So don't feel badly if you're repeating something, because not everybody in this room was at those meetings.
So this is in addition to what we've discussed previously, or to clarify what we've discussed? Because we're not going to talk about all of those.
In addition to or to clarify would be great.
Okay, I can start. I have a question about the materials. It took us several hours to go through the presentation. So I guess I'm wondering, how do you present all of those options to? I'm wondering like the process for doing that, presenting that in a way that's the community can understand it in a short amount of time, because it took us several hours. So how to condense that into, 1 hour? Yeah.
Great question, and that's exactly what we are working on right now and doing with Kat. How do we tell this story, make sure we don't leave anything out? What's essential for people to understand? How do the building blocks work together? It became kind of clear to us last night that people really need to understand the groundwork laid by the CAT team, those 6 or 7 items. They need to understand that the master facility plan is addressing those. So it's a process, and we're going through it right now. But the goal is to have a presentation that is no more than an hour for the community. And that's one of the reasons why we want to know, what do you want to learn, so we can make sure that we give the community the right materials. One thing that's clear right now, there's 2 options for one of the school buildings. Do you want to learn from the community at large how they feel about those 2 options? Or is that a decision that you want to make as a board and just have us take one of them out?
No. Go ahead. No, go ahead.
Well, my question is around class size. We keep hearing about class size, but we also hear boundary adjustments or neighborhood schools. So to ask a question, and I don't know if I can formulate it precisely on the spot here, but it's around, are you willing to invest X dollars, whatever it's required, at each of the schools in order to get the class size you want and without the boundary adjustments? So if people want neighborhood schools and they want a certain class size, then they have to invest in the largest dollar bucket. And the whole community has to agree with that. So how do we, that's a key core item for me.
And that's a great question.
So I agree with Karen, and that's how I wrote class size and boundary issues, how they fit into this discussion, and how do we manage those. I wrote, I want to understand what the community's thoughts are about all-day kindergarten. I want to understand how the community was engaged in our discussion. And I want to understand the community's thoughts on the equity of resources that are provided throughout the district.
Great, thank you.
I'd like to have part of the presentation be about I guess we call it the cost of doing nothing. Like there's a lot of education has to go on with our current maintenance needs, which is a high ticket item. So, you know, just going beyond, just not even talking about building a new building, what the maintenance needs are, we need to educate the group on what we're facing right now with our aging buildings.
So I would like to know also about the all-day kindergarten, agreeing with whoever said that. I think it was Margaret. Sorry. And also what Shannon said about the cost of doing nothing and making sure that the community understands if we do nothing, what does that really look like for our community 5 years, 10 years out? And what impact does that have, not just on our buildings, but the classroom? Because you have some issues where you may have to maintain and classroom. And then the thing I would like to add is the community ready to move our schools into be future ready? Or do they just want us to fix them? I mean, I think the maintenance issues are the maintenance issues, but there's a lot of future-ready sustainability pieces in there, and is the community wanting that to be included in this plan?
So, Marcia, I'm going to go back to the discussion of that Shannon brought up with the cost of doing nothing, and make sure that it's clear that the class size interest and need that we keep hearing about there's no way of addressing it if we do nothing.
Thanks.
All right, I'd like to preemptively agree with every question my colleagues ask. I think they ask some great questions, and I'd love to hear the answers to all of them, especially John. I trust that you'll get through the why, because we beat that to death for several meetings. And in my mind, I'm curious about what you're presenting and what you're talking about with CAT, because we don't have a plan in my mind. We have some really good work done by folks in laying out options. When you made a comment about whether or not we wanted to decide on something before going out, I think we, as a board, definitely don't want to decide. We're trying to frame the issue and collect the information in a way that makes it easy to communicate to folks out there to get feedback. So my concern with the process is that you go through all of this and we wait till June and we get updates, and then there's a plan that's dropped down here, and I'm curious about all the different elements and the moving parts, and I think in my mind the biggest things are, obviously Lincoln and the approach and what the implications are for where we locate kids for at least a year during that. Boundaries, which haven't even been discussed yet. And it may well be that those conversations stop everything in their tracks. I don't know. I don't want to wait till June to figure that out. Then cost and phasing are another huge issue. I don't think you can have a conversation, as we found out in the end of Focus 205, without a cost conversation. And there's this really big number, and we can't make that an all or none number. I think the question is so what would it look at? What are the opportunities for smaller phasing of this? How does this roll out? I know we talked about if we rebuild Lincoln, if we don't rebuild Lincoln, but what if we do the other things to? I just don't know. This is a very kind of open-ended feedback conversation based upon the data and the information and the work that we've done. And so I just want to make sure that we're iterating this and not waiting, because the timeline is very activity-based, but not necessarily outcome-based right now. So what are the things that we hope to achieve on your timeline? So we do all these things, but at each step, something has to be gated, right? Go, no go, decide this, do that. We don't have that view now, which is when do we decide on which way Lincoln goes does that impact the way people think about these other things, rather than waiting till June and, okay, let's say they wanted this with Lincoln and then that, and then we get the, well, if I'd have known that Lincoln was going to do this, I wouldn't have voted for that. That was some of the feedback we got on the phone conversations. So those are my, my ideas. I just want to make sure that this doesn't become a list of boxes to check.
Great. Well, we specifically said we're not going to offer people a Chinese menu, was my term, of options. We're going to have to package them so that they are clear to the community in some sort of grouping, probably with a financial price tag for each. And to go back to your first question, what was shared with Kat last night was just a selection of slides from all of the presentations that you've seen to gauge which things they understood and which approaches they understood. They were not asked to comment upon the plans, just upon the presentation, because in this process, we want to make sure that everybody gets sort of an equal vote. So we're not changing any plans based on what feedback the CAT team offered. We need to hear from you tonight. This is the first step, though, so that we can put together a presentation that reflects the questions that you want to ask the community. That work's just beginning right now.
But again, it seems like the big bang. You know, we're doing these really large things in small focus groups, and it's a big effort, and there's some really simple questions to ask. Let's get the boundaries proposal out there. Let's talk to people. Let's go to the Lincoln families and present a couple things before we start some big iron kind of process.
Right. So the boundaries conversation is in April. You're going to be having a presentation from the boundaries expert, which is not me. And we are going out to the folks at those 3 schools that are most impacted to start asking them questions next month.
Right, but how do you have a conversation with people that are going to be very impacted by boundary changes before you have a boundary changes proposal?
That will not, we won't be talking about boundary changes at that point.
But then how do you get feedback from those folks if one of the major implications of what they decide is where the boundaries are going to be drawn?
We're going to have a second conversation. And the boundary changes, I feel, really impact your full community. I have not seen them yet. Dr. Moyer's not seen them yet, so.
No, I mean, that is a critical path conversation that starts before everything else, because as we've heard with the initial 205 conversations, if you would have told me, I would have answered differently. I don't want that conversation again. I think we need to be comprehensive in what we're talking about. I think we do have a Chinese menu right now. And if we need to do some more work to get it to something closer to what you need to go out to the community, I think that's something we need to do. But again, this is governed more by the gating outcomes than by a calendar in my mind. So.
I feel as if that's something, I hear your concerns, and I feel like that's something that the board, if that's the order that you want to take it out in, we can adjust this calendar. It's not going to give you the opportunity to gather the feedback and make a decision for November.
But again, you said you were going to iterate. You would have to iterate with Lincoln anyway, but you only have one thought exchange with Lincoln Field and Edison, and then boundary thought exchange after that. You're going to have to go back again to Lincoln Field and Edison after that.
That is possible.
Oh, I would consider it probable.
Okay.
So again, I just don't know how much work do you want to do before we have that information. I guess I'll leave that up to my colleagues on the board to decide how hard to press on this.
No, I think Chris's point is well considered. We had, and when I look at this was a beginning communication plan, and I think either there's got to be iterations of this, because if the boundary information comes, you gather some initial information, and then based off that initial information, and this is me thinking out loud, you get some ideas, and then you have to go back and take that information. Each time you get new information, somehow you have to test it. So I think this is going to be an iterative process. I appreciate the fact that you wanted to put something out there so we can understand what those first couple months might look like. But I think there's a April, May, June, and in my thought, there is most likely another process that starts maybe after the school year begins, or I don't know how difficult it is to do it over the summer, but in my mind, there's a process that talks about August, September, October that re-gauges all the things that we did through March, April, May, and June to make sure we understand what was told. In my mind, that's how I see it working out. Now, once we start on this process, maybe everyone is going to be crystal clear. I just don't think we're ready for that yet. I think and we've talked about this before, I think the November date is probably very, very aggressive. I understand it's a target, but I think it's a very, very aggressive target. So.
Let me just first say I agree with what everybody said so far. So let's get that out of the way. And I would like to emphasize things that Margaret said. I think the fastest way to start implementing what our community wants is to understand thoroughly what our community wants and get it right the first time. I've seen, Elmhurst supposedly has a reputation for voting in educational referendums. I've lived here a while. I've seen plenty fail because they weren't the right plan for the community. And I've seen referendums pass even though they were more expensive than the ones that failed because they were the right plan for the community. So let's work very hard to get it right the first time. And I'm just going to say a couple of things I think kind of reiterates what everybody else said. We got to come, well, actually, let me first ask. You said that the job of the CAT committee is not to vet the plan. What is the process to vet the plan? All these focus groups?
The process to vet the plan is to ask the community via a series of tools, focus groups, community meetings, thought exchange, possibly an online survey, possibly a poll, what they think of the plan. But before we can ask them what they think of the plan, we need to explain the plan to them. And so that would include the work that was done by Focus 205, the problems that you want to solve, the current situation at the schools. It does have a lot of moving parts, and I don't have the slide from last time where we put up a big graphic of all the things that people need to understand and all the pieces of those topics.
The thing I heard most frequently at Focus 205 sessions were, you're asking us to make decisions without a price tag attached. We're going to solve that, right? We're going to put a price tag on things.
Right. So you had, and it was included in the last presentation done by Elizabeth Hennessy. There was, I think it was 4 options.
No, that's not putting a price tag on things. What we need to put a price tag on is this is what, of this total pie that we're spending, this is what it takes to bring. This is the dollar amount it takes to bring all-day kindergarten to Elmhurst. This is the dollar amount it takes to rebuild Lincoln School. This is the dollar amount it takes to renovate/rebuild Field School. And all of that, and perhaps that's a second referendum for operational costs to address class sizes, as you say. We've got to figure out a way to figure out what revisions people would make. I mean, the plan that we've gone through, I can think of at least 4 iterations of that are different, and I don't know what's more palatable to the community. And as Chris says, the first thing we have to figure out is our community's reaction to elementary school boundary changes. If that's a non-negotiable, that the community does not want to see those boundaries changed, then we're coming with the wrong plan. So that's issue number 1. And then we have to have those different iterations from that feedback we get with specific dollar costs attached, not just one big broad cost. And I'd also like to see those costs. You can talk millions of dollars, but I think what really people care about is what does that do to my personal property tax bill? And those are the units in which I'd like those dollar costs expressed, not only an aggregate dollar cost, but how does it impact the taxes on whatever the median home price at Elmhurst is, $350, $380, something like that. All right. So I've already hashed through all-day kindergarten. Did I get everything? And then I guess my last question is who decides what exactly what options are brought to the community? How do we decide? Here's the 4 things we're going to bring to the kind of final focus groups.
Great, so I can't answer the boundary adjustment, what that's going to look like when we ask the community, because we don't have the plan yet. So I do agree it's very important to take that out to the community, and it's a very important part of this plan. Right now, you have authorized as a group, not you personally, taking the plans as they currently exist out to the community, and what we're working on right now is exactly what Shannon asked. There's a lot of information, it has a lot of moving parts. What is the way it will be most digestible in a 1-hour presentation to the community? How can we break it out so that it includes costs for certain projects? We communicate the fact that we want to make all of this education, the facilities equitable across the district so that all students have the ability to grow and learn. So that's what we're working on now. But it does not include the boundary information yet. And I'm sorry, that may seem like I'm not answering your question. It's a bit of a messy process to take all the presentations and all the slides and turn them into a shorter, cohesive story. And that's why we want to know, what do you want us to take out? Because it will help us and it will help you.
What I just want to make sure is that we spend the effort as we get feedback from the community to modify the plan based upon the community's feedback. And to bring options. My guess is we're going to hear, a loud cry for maybe one plan and then a modified plan, and then only then can you go and say, well, here's 2 plans. Which do you prefer? Here's 3 plans. What do you prefer?
Great. So yes, we will modify the plans based on feedback. At this point, our thought was that we would do those focus groups at those 3 schools. That might lead to some modifications, but when we're ready to take the plan out for those community meetings, we will not modify the plan until after we have all 4 community meetings so that everyone has an equal say in the modifications. I hope that answered your question.
I agree with what everybody said, but I'm particularly in agreement with clearly and simply articulating the price in terms of tax increase on a particular home. Millions is a dead bang loser because the numbers look huge. The same thing applies to boundary changes. When you just say boundary changes, the first thing that happens is people think, it's me, it's my family, I'm gone. Are we talking minor boundary changes? Are we talking major boundary changes? Are we talking particular parts of town? I think you have to put meaning in that question. If you ask boundary changes, they're going to say no. And they should, because they don't know what it is. It's scary, unhinged. It's got to be connected to something. And then on your bottom question, that's actually a follow-up question to what should the timing be? I think we should find out from our community. Do they think this is urgent? Do they think this is something it's coming and we need to get started on it? Do they think now? Do they think later? Perhaps you show those dates. But then the follow-up is, do things change over time? That's my thoughts.
Thanks.
So I just wanted to add on actually what you said about boundary changes. I feel like the piece that, I mean, we don't have anything about it, but we're not really sure what question that's answering. So when you come to us with the presentation about boundaries, what is that actually solving? That's, you know, what will those, if there are going to be boundary adjustments, what problem does that solve?
Well, I'm going to leave that to the experts who are going to be coming to talk to you next month. It's my understanding that they will help you balance class size, or the goal is to find some boundary adjustments that will help balance class size across the district, that hopefully if your boundary is adjusted will allow you to go to a school that is newer or possibly just rebuilt, and that the district will do everything that they can to grandfather families in if the boundary adjustments occur when they have children still in school, and the timeline is such that it likely will not impact any students who are currently in elementary school, just given the construction timeline and the fact that there's been nothing voted upon. So that is the kind of information I think that we would include in any conversation about boundary adjustments, but as to what the actual adjustments are, I think we're gonna have to wait a few weeks to find out.
I mean, what we would present, I'm picturing, is some theoretical options for potential boundary adjustments that the community would react to. I mean, I think that there could be 3 or 4 possibilities that could make sense. The driver of the boundary adjustments in the first place is the desire to move toward all-day kindergarten. How do you accommodate that if you don't want grade level centers, and if you don't want an all-day kindergarten center? If you want it at your neighborhood school, how do you find the space to accommodate that? So really, the all-day kindergarten question is driving the boundary adjustment conversation. Otherwise, there probably wouldn't be having that as part of necessarily the facilities discussion. It could be a separate discussion, but it becomes tied in because of all-day kindergarten. The auxiliary benefit that we would hope to gain by doing that, if that becomes part of the plan, is that would then allow us to balance class sizes across the district and get the class size issue hopefully off the table for the foreseeable future.
I guess, I mean, a follow-up to, I think, where Jim was before. So you work with the community, the CAT team, to put a plan together, or to put the communication together around the plan, right? I mean, is that?
So the CAT team we're going to put together a presentation. We've all agreed that there's a lot of moving parts to this presentation. There's a lot of information that needs to be shared and sequenced to put together an hour-long presentation that touches on so many items. We're going to use the CAT team to make sure that we're telling that story clearly, that it makes sense to people who didn't have the benefit of seeing as many presentations as the board did. One of the things we learned last night in the few slides that we pulled out to show them was that the community is going to need more background information about this. Why did we decide all-day kindergarten? Going back to Focus 205. What is STEM? What are future-ready classrooms? So they're really just helping us. They're asking us hard questions that we would prefer to have answered in the presentation to make the presentation more effective when we take it out to the full community.
Okay, and that's great, and I look forward to hearing about that, but when does it come back to us to make sure that it accurately reflects our understanding of what was presented?
So we talked about board updates. We do not want to present the board, I'm sorry, we do not want to present the community presentation at a board meeting and sort of steal the thunder of the community meetings and the exit survey and the research that we'll be doing. So it's going to be shared with you probably via email or in 2x2s. Since we can't do it in closed session.
You could, you don't want to.
Could what?
You could share it with all of us, you're just saying you don't want to.
No, I do want to share it with all of you. I don't want to share it.
No, but I want to talk to my colleagues to make sure that what I understood is what Jim understood is what Margaret understood this to. What we saw was really great work. It just had a lot of open ends to it. And I'm curious to see what the CAT team has as far as when they start to poke at it and what they see as gaps and how they want stuff addressed. And then I'd like to see it, because ultimately it's our 7 of us butts on the line when it comes to this. And I want to know exactly what's being discussed out there with the community. I want to know what the plan was, how it's being framed, and how it's being positioned, particularly when it comes to the financial side of it, which has a big impact, and it's not an easily explainable thing, depending on whether you do this now or you do this in 5 years. Because of our bond structure. So the answer to Jim's question, what does it cost, is very different tomorrow than it is 5 years from now. And so that messaging is critical to us, and I need to know what that is, and I would like to weigh in on that, and I think my colleagues would too. So I want to make sure that we have an opportunity to have a conversation about the message that is being presented to our community and not being bystanders and waiting to see it come back in June.
Right. I don't think you should be bystanders and wait until June. And I think I need to talk to Shannon and Dr. Moyer about the best way to bring it back to the board so that you can have a thoughtful discussion, and to my colleagues.
Okay, yes, and I'd just like to say, I don't like the 2x2 thing. I think we have much better discussions when it's a group of us.
And I agree, it is a challenge to have a one-off or two-off conversation. It is, I think we build upon each other. It also helps to make sure that we all understand exactly what is being said. So I think we are a board of 7, and I think we should operate as a board of 7. So I am in complete agreement on having it brought back to the board prior to going to the community. Now, I know you mentioned about stealing the thunder, but I have to say this is way too complex of a topic that people can afford to see it multiple times in order to try to understand it. So I don't think that is going to be a concern.
All right, well, we will look at the calendar, and we talked about pivoting and being flexible, and we will do our best to do that. Anything else before we move on to the additional questions that you'd like to learn or see covered in the presentation? Well, with that, I'll open the official question and answer period.
Okay, could you explain the reasoning behind, I mean, I know you're doing you have the focus groups planned for Edison, Lincoln, and Field, because those are the schools that are majorly impacted, but what's the thinking behind it not doing one at every elementary, just because really this project is so huge that it in some way most likely touches everyone? So could you just elaborate on that? Because I am a believer that let's just, I don't know, like let's just exhaust it.
So I agree you could have a conversation at every school. So definitely think that's fine. Right now we're working with a limited time period. So what we're trying to accomplish with those conversations, you're talking about the schools that are the most impacted, is we're trying to incorporate the questions that the parents and community members at those schools have into the greater community conversation, so we don't get bogged down answering them again, so we can really dig down a bit deeper in the research. So this is the timeline that we have now. If the timeline looked different, we might have a different plan. I do want to say though, if you proceed with the idea of a November ballot initiative, that there's going to be a lot of time for an informational campaign where you're taking the more final plans out to each of the school buildings, and I would say that that would be something you would be doing next fall.
But I kind of want to hear from them now.
Well, it's certainly something we can do. Right now, we're working with a specific budget. Our team was charged with a specific task and a specific timeline, and I said, we'll pivot and we'll be flexible, but we need direction on that. I'm not trying to dodge it. This is what we have now. Resources are resources, and they always come down to time and money. So that we're at that intersection right now.
Thank you. So I think you had answered, because I was trying to understand what that limited time frame was, and so I think you answered that question about its amount, it's the resources that I understand that we have contracted with you. So I guess, and I think what I'm hearing from the board is that I don't want to speak for the board. I think what I'm hearing is additional flexibility in maybe what we thought was going to happen. You know, all these things were going to be wrapped up by June. It's not going to be wrapped up by June. So a big ask on flexibility, but an important ask if we want to do this correct, is why can't we do, instead of having this in June, synthesizing the data, we're not ready to do that, why can't we do a focus group at all the elementary schools? And that's what this looks like. We've got all this baseline information for this focus group, and realizing that that means we can't get done what we thought we were going to get done in June, that this whole process gets pushed out. So that is something, a consideration I would think we need to discuss.
Yeah, can I just add to Mark? Our gating factor here is not time. All right, I'd rather be late with a good plan, to Jim's point. It really isn't. Our gating factor that we have here is community desire and energy, and building it the right way. The timeline will figure itself out if we do that right. Now, we do have to put some goals out there for getting things done, because we don't want this to go forever. But I really don't want to say that we're limited, but we have a limited timeline. It just, in my mind, it's absolutely not. It is, what are the steps that we need to take to ensure that we have an engaged, accepting community that's very excited about this? I would love to see a day when we have public comment up here with people begging us to put this on the agenda. That's what we're trying to get to. You know, and so I don't care how long it takes, but I'm not willing to vote to put this on a ballot until that time hits. So what my question to you is what plan should we have put in place from a communication standpoint to get to that point? Once we have that plan figured out, then how long do you think that should take? Not here, I've got to get this done by this date, fit it in. And that's where I think the issue's coming is we're kind of doing this backwards. We need to do this based upon what are the steps that are necessary to build community support and excitement, and then we'll figure out, we'll revisit the timeline after you tell us those steps.
That's a big ask because it's not what we were tasked for, so I would respectfully ask you to give us a little bit of time to say what we think the steps are. If you were to elongate the timeline, I think we would probably spread out some of the community engagement tasks. We would wait till we had all of the information in before developing a presentation, and we would take it on the road to more schools over a longer period of time.
And I guess that's kind of where we're at now with the 7 of us. Is that what we want? Do we want to ask Dave and you to go back and come up with a different approach that reflects that? Before we put a calendar together, I'd like you to come back. I personally, if the rest of the board agrees, I think that would be the outcome right now, would be please think about that and come back in your professional opinion and tell us what the best way to do this to be successful is, not to meet a timeline. And then we can have a conversation about, now realistically, where are we? Is that something that the rest of the board wants?
And in the same vein, then, are we willing to put in maybe throw in an extra meeting, or, like we've done a couple workshops already, so that we can dig deep into just this, where we don't have the other business of the board? Because I think if we want to do this, all of us, we have to commit to all of us doing that. All right.
That was hard to get the meetings in the first place, so I'm wondering if some of the delay was trying to get people together, the right people. So yeah, if we can commit to meeting, because it's very difficult for the 7 of us to get together.
But my understanding from this plan is part of that's us, but a very large part of that is talking to various community groups in the right sequence, bringing the elementaries in, I don't know, you're the professional on that, but if I gave you a blank sheet of paper with no timeline on it, and you said, what are the steps to increase, to give us the highest likelihood of community engagement, energy, and excitement, what are those steps? And I know some of those involve extra meetings on our part, but a lot of those involve probably rescoping your job, but also, what we're going to be doing.
So I'd say it's some of all of those. There's certainly rescoping the work, my work, but that is not what I would say. I think that having all of the information and having all of you agree, this is all of the information that we want to share. Here's the way we want to package it. So if you want a zero tax impact plan, here's what could get done. Because you're talking about a number of complex financial decisions. So you're going to refinance, you're going to wait till the debt rolls off, and then there might be a plan that has sort of, the prices I have seen so far are not huge tax impacts, but it's how do you package those things all together so that there's 3 options that are clear to the community, which is kind of what I thought we were about to embark upon doing. But I'm hearing that.
But I'm saying I can't put 3 options together. I'd love to hear where the boundaries are lining up and how that impacts the decisions on field. Lincoln, do they want to send their kids away? Do they want trailers? Do they want us to do this in parts? Again, to Margaret's point, this is very iterative as you get to that point. I mean, the zero tax option and the not, or do you do the existing schools later? Do you just do Lincoln right now? I'd like to hear the community's feedback. We have done this several meetings now amongst ourselves, and that's where I think the CAT team and some initial conversations coming back to us are important. But to Margaret's point, that's going to iterate. So it's not going to be a plan at that point. It's going to be certain aspects of what's been presented to us that I'd like to know more about before we get behind a plan that we put out there.
So I'm hearing a desire for more check-in points along the way, is what I'm hearing. So you'd like to hear after each sort of set of meetings what was learned?
The question is, how do you get to the point where we can get these variables that are spinning in the plan to stop, to start to coalesce into a plan that then goes through this process? Because you say you want to give the same presentation to everybody, but I'm not sure I don't know, I'd like to see it, but I don't know that we have the plan that we want to show to everybody.
Okay, the operating assumption right now, and things can change, we're flexible and we pivot, is that the plan that was presented on February 27th, I think it was, do I have that right? Maybe the Saturday before that, was the plan that you wanted to take out to share with the community, plus the boundary information that's going to be shared next month.
What is that plan? I think it had a couple of Lincolns.
So I think it was pretty straightforward, and the only option the only options were how many years were for rebuilding?
Well, there was Lincoln, do you scrape it? Do you not scrape it? I think that Jim had asked if we could look at what the option was to rebuild Field, because why would we want to put that much money into a building? What happens to the other buildings in, what was it, 10, 15 years that are going to be 100 years old as well? I mean, those are, like, before we start spending money on these buildings, what are the general feedback out there? I mean, we've spent a lot of time talking about these things amongst ourselves. I think that we're hoping that the engagement would start to bring feedback into the same issues we're mulling over, that then would then help us coalesce that into an option or two or three that we could then take out and start to really get behind. I don't know now. I'd love to hear the answer to Jim's question about whether the community would be interested in rebuilding Field.
So I'm going to have to defer to Dr. Moyer on that, because I am not sure that question is in the process of being answered.
Well, it was, I haven't gotten a response yet, but it was expressed to the people at the meeting that they wanted that information, and we explained that there were some complexities involved in that, but that they were going to try to get us that information. So I don't have it yet, but I know that, in fact, that came up last night too. So it is something that we want to look at. I just don't have the information back. But I mean, in rough terms, if you look at what the current price tag is for Lincoln, I think it was about 17 or 18 million. And if you look at the new school at Lincoln, that was 32 million to 35 million. But I don't think we can go apples to apples on that because of some of the complexities of the site. And code and other types of issues involved. I think one of the things they said, we probably would not be able to build as large of a Lincoln on that site for various reasons and some other things like that. So it might not, I might not be able to get that answer right away, because it might not be able to give a simple high level kind of an answer that it could be misleading if we don't give them some time to look into some of those other factors.
Right, but that's another variable in the set of options, I guess I'll call it, because it's not a plan yet. And so that's where, I mean, talk to people. I mean, I think the CAT team is a very valuable resource to answer these questions too, as well as we get together to talk about what we think the right package is to have that further conversation with. But I do agree with Margaret. I mean, I think you're going to go through an iteration. You're going to do the whole thing again.
Oh, I just wanted to say that it's almost like we need to call this the master facility options, because it isn't a plan yet. It's just, to me, all the options, and we want to hear what the community thinks so we can start, filtering it down to what, is possible. So I think sometimes the language of it's a plan, well, it's not a plan yet. It's a possibility. So, anyway, just.
Never too late to change the title. We can even change the URL.
Right. I don't think we're changing that much. We want to just make sure we take the time that's needed, not be rushed by a date, and then also expand the reach of who we're targeting. We have 8 elementaries. So those are the two main things I'm hearing. Okay.
So Malia's not here. I can't tell you if it's possible to calendar that many meetings in that time period. But and I'm going to have to ask you, the administrative team and board, for direction on the timetable. This is sort of what we were tasked with, was trying to preserve the fall as an option, and we are working hard to do that for you.
I mean, I guess it's what you're hearing. I mean, it is iterative. Like, maybe we get some information that we weren't expecting, and you could speed up or slow down based on what you're getting back. Did you say?
I think we've always said that we would let the process dictate when we were able to get to the people and find out what they thought, that we thought that some of that would take care of itself, that would become obvious as to whether or not November actually is a realistic possibility or not. But knowing what we know about the voting trends and the demographics and the options available to us, we wanted to at least keep that as a possibility in our thinking. And I think that if it plays out that does not become a possibility, it'll certainly become evident soon enough.
So the one thing, and I thought I heard you say this, Marcia. So and maybe I am not. What I think I hear and Shannon is that I've heard a strong desire for additional focus groups, and the idea was 8 for each one of the elementary. And I also heard that we're almost flipping the question, and I like what Chris said on, instead of how do we get all of this done by, June or July, the question is what do we prepare that we have the highest, how do we prepare so we have the highest likelihood of success? And if that's the question, then the timeline will fall out of that question. But I think that should be our question, is how do we prepare, plan, communicate so we have the highest likelihood of success? What does that look like? What does that take? And we have our first idea that says 8 focus groups. That's our first idea. And we might find after those 8 focus groups, things are running much smoother and going quicker. But we might find that we need to make some additional changes. But I think so we're putting this together piece by piece. But the key question, highest likelihood of success. What does a plan look like for the highest likelihood of success? Yeah, what's the process look like for the highest likelihood of success?
So the process looks a lot like the process that we have laid out for you. So the end date is always an election. We also know that there's some elections that are better suited to a successful referendum. So that was what we were working towards. So it is all of the steps that we just discussed. And the question, and we've kind of been dancing around it, and I might get myself fired for saying this, but without an end date, we had a potential end date, so we made the timeline fit that potential end date, because that was what we were charged with. And if that's if you're asking me a whole different question, then it took us a little while to put this together, and I would respectfully ask for a little while to contemplate that and come back to you.
But I would say that you're doing some good work with the CAD team, and you just started that conversation. I'd love to have that
Started it last night.
I'd love to have that continue, because I think that I like their feedback on how they understood what the stuff because we looked at it all, and I think we're still developing our understanding.
Right. So, and I would say that just 2 things as you consider this timeline. One of the reasons, in addition to start the community engagement this spring, was a clear charge from the CAT team, and then it went back to your board president and to your superintendent, told people that there would be information, some answers, maybe not to all the questions, presented to them. So that's something that you as a school board have promised to the community. One of the other drivers of this timeline is frankly also communication and getting onto the school calendar. So as flexible as we all might feel about doing meetings, as flexible as I will and Leslie will try and make our calendars to get here for more meetings. This is a very busy time of year in your school buildings. If anybody still has kids in school, you know that. If you're an administrator, you know that. So we don't have everyone's bandwidth. We talked about an annual report going out. That's not in print. Nobody needs to worry, but it would likely, it's a good way to let everybody know when those community meetings are. That was sort of one of the components of it. So Nothing's been put out yet, no announcements of focus groups. No, this is just the annual reports just in planning, no postcards are in the mail, because we knew we might hear something different tonight. But I think we have to acknowledge that as much as we think it's easy to pull together a casual meeting, it actually takes a lot of work on the part of building administrators, your communication team, your administrative team, you know, and I would put your consultant sort of at the bottom of the list because you hired us to help make your life easier, not harder. But we, at some point, are going to need to pull the trigger on these things. Our tentative plan had been to let the principals start doing a save the date for those initial focus groups this week, because they're coming up next month. So we are sort of getting to a point where we need to make some decision, need some direction from all of you.
I think I need a little clarification from the board. I didn't think that we would stop that work. It would just be, it would be more of that outreach. Am I hearing that right?
Yeah, and what may be presented at those focus groups may not be as gelled as you might think. And I think what you're hearing from the board is we really want to hear from the community. These are great opportunities to do it. You just may have to do it again. And I think we want to do it initially with more locations, just so that everybody gets a piece of this, so that we then gather this all back and tweak and do what we need to do to get to an actual plan at that point, I think, based upon what the feedback is, depending on where it goes.
I'm going to go back to this slide, which honestly I can barely read from here, but we're really looking at a period. The focus groups, I believe, start April 11th, and maybe someone has better eyes than I do. The first community meeting I know is April 30th, so right now we have all this scheduled over a pretty tight 6-week window. And we need to start promoting it. I cannot promise you, without Malia here and talking to the building principals and knowing their PTA meeting schedules, if we can get 5 more focus groups done in that time period. I'd like to say for sure we can, but it's circumstances beyond everyone's control.
But I think what we're asking is to push out that time frame. So if the focus groups, right now I'm looking at the slide where you have, initially you had focus groups planned in 3 focus groups in April. And then in May, and in May you had these community meetings. I think what I'm hearing is push those community meetings back. Not saying they don't occur, but push those back so we can have more focus groups in the time frame.
So an option would be, and it will not preserve that November date for you, would be to just do focus groups this spring and sort of spread things out, do community meetings and thought exchange next fall is a possibility. And then if we move ahead, to this slide, you're still faced with some tough decisions about when you might want to go on the ballot.
The community is going to tell you when you're going to go on the ballot.
I understand what you're saying, but communicating with a community of this size is an expensive proposition when you're talking about print and people's time. And I understand you're saying that, but you also have to be prepared. You have to educate them, and you have to recognize that the average person, I'm not disagreeing with you, by the way, but they're not going to stay engaged with this process for 18 months.
Right, but that's why I was thinking that we have great PTAs, and we could do some things before we needed the industrial strength version of it now. I think your timeline is really what it is between now and the end of school, which is basically 2 months. You get to as many people as you can to figure out what the feedback is. We take the summer to digest and gel that to turn it into something that hopefully in the fall then can begin a process that has something a lot more defined, if it works that way. But in my mind, the rest of this school year here, while people are still around and paying attention, is about gathering as much feedback as possible and iterating as much as we can to get to that point in time where we can get those questions answered and then into some kind of a format that starts to gel a little bit more so that potentially in the fall we can have a more specific discussion.
That is a very valid approach. You know, you've changed a big variable on me, so I can't disagree. And we talked about being flexible, we talked about pivoting, we talked about learning from new information we gather. This is an accelerated timetable, the one that is before you tonight. I would be remiss if I didn't say otherwise.
Can't we hold the scheduled meetings that we've got, that were presented to us tonight? And at some point, either during or after those meetings, decide what to, based upon the progress of those meetings and what we're hearing back, decide when and how we want to pivot.
Yeah, I'd like to leave the option open based on the meetings that have been scheduled or are going to be scheduled. Like, see how that goes.
Yeah, I think we can get some very valuable feedback from these meetings that were presented, those dates that were presented us tonight, and just remain flexible enough if the community gels around an idea during those meetings, then we have something. And if not, we need more feedback.
But the issue on that is before you, whenever that first meeting is, there's that step that we want to talk about what the message is, what CAT came up with, what is being presented in those groups. And so my question is, can you fit, if you start sending out cards this week to save the date, we've got now a date that we have to commit to getting through the CAT, getting back to us, pivoting or massaging if we have to. But we need to agree that that's going to work as a board for that, as a CAT team. I don't know what those timelines are, but I just want to make sure that, again, we don't get to, we got a bunch of dates up there, but I'm still not, I want to make sure that the information and the message is the right message to those folks. Going back to where we started, the questions are the right ones.
Right, so I just have to say this one more time because I feel so strongly about it. CAT is only helping us understand if the messages are clear. They're not crafting the messages. They're almost, I don't know, some of them might be here, like guinea pigs. Like, we want to show it to someone who's not steeped in it to make sure it makes sense. So that's really their role. Perfect,
but you're taking hours of information and boiling it down with their direction, but we've also got our ideas, and so I think that's a huge piece of input and help for us, but ultimately, with their feedback, we're going to have to agree on an hour or less of distillation before you go out.
I have an idea, and it's not, well, I know it's rare, but it's not an either-or proposition, okay? And I think it preserves the concepts that you are suggesting you want to see, which is, as I understand it, to have more focus groups early on here in the process, and then also kind of make sure that we're establishing the process that we want, not just letting the calendar drive the process, and then also ensuring that the board has a chance to weigh in on the final, not the final, but on a draft, revision of a draft, before it goes out to the larger community and to some of the larger groups. I have an idea, and I need to go back and talk to some people about how to do that, but I think there is a way to do that. I think if you give us a chance to get back together and talk to each other, I think there's something out there that could work.
I just wanted to say, I think, it seems like there's momentum just by the number of people who applied. And I think that it's important that we protect or keep that going, maintain it, thank you. Maintain it because, we learned a lot of things during Focus 205, and one is when you stretch out the process, people, they lose interest, they forget what happened, they forget why you're there. And so I think it's important that, we may need to add some things into the timeline, and, maybe that's on us, but I think it's important to maintain that momentum and see where we end up after each step.
Thank you, Marcia. That was a long time for you to be answering our questions, but thanks. It was good.
I'm always happy to answer your questions. And are we waiting before we send anything out? I actually do have a question for you guys. Can you summarize the next steps for me?
For the dates the April dates?
April and May.
Maybe if you can put them on the screen.
I would, are the May dates already printed?
No, that has not gone to press. We really wanted to be respectful of the process, so there have been no save the dates in the principals' newsletters. Nothing's been put on the school calendars. All that's been published is the board packet.
So the board, my understanding was that the board said, or at least one of you said, I believe, to continue with the process, so to not stop the process. So go ahead and have those focus groups, right? Mm-hmm. So I think for the focus groups that we already had envisioned, those are in April. I think that if we just touch base tomorrow, we can resolve that question. But I think that we could at least get some information out on April, even if we have to hold off on May, although you don't want to do two different, I don't know, we'll talk about it tomorrow. But are you okay, you're okay with the stuff going out under the terms I just said before? That we include more focus groups and...
Save the dates. Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I'm most interested in seeing the content before it shows up in front of those folks.
Right.
Instructional rounds update from Mary.
Good evening, everyone. Amy was reminding me earlier that last year I was up here for 90 minutes, so I'm glad it was not me tonight. No, we don't need to make that happen. So I'm really happy to be up here tonight to give you an update on instructional rounds. This is our second year doing instructional rounds, and really this presentation is to inform and update. I want to just review why we do instructional rounds, what we are focusing on this year, how we use the data from instructional rounds, and really where are we going from here. So for those who are in the audience or who will be watching later who might not have seen previous presentations on instructional rounds, I just wanted to review just very briefly. Instructional rounds are based on the medical model, so many of us can think back to medical shows we've watched on TV where we see groups of doctors going into a patient's room and then discussing the case at length and deciding what will be the best course of treatment for the best possible outcome for the patient. And so instructional rounds in education work very much the same way. In our district, our rounds that take place in every one of our schools all have a common purpose. We go into classrooms, the administrators do observations, we collect data, we bring that data back and discuss it first as a leadership team of administrators, and then individual school data goes back to the buildings to discuss as a leadership team, and then with the whole staff and individual schools then make a plan for their own improvement. So this year, our area of emphasis, if you'll recall, those of you who saw some of the presentations last year on instructional rounds, we really focused on learning targets. And there were a couple of reasons for that. It's connected to our student achievement objective on balanced assessment and student engagement. We felt it was something very concrete that as our teachers became comfortable and familiar with the process of instructional rounds, they would be able to have very specific and tangible feedback for improvement. So this year, our area of emphasis has shifted a bit to rigor, which is really taking the complexity of instructional rounds to the next level. We've often talked about our rigor and relevance framework that we use, that model from the International Center for Leadership in Education. And we look at rigor as being able to apply knowledge and thinking to unknown situations. So while we're looking at rigor, there's three areas that we're looking for. One is thoughtful work, one is high-level questioning, and one is academic discussion. And actually the rigor framework that we use, that rubric, is in board docs with this presentation. So after the first collection in fall, where really it was collecting baseline data, and that's something that can be difficult for our teachers to accept and understand, because our teachers are so committed to doing well and wanting to do the right thing that baseline data, sort of your pre-assessment, isn't as great as they want it to be. But again, it's baseline data before the professional learning takes place. So once the fall data collection period ended, we asked the principals, when they went back and worked with their staff, to really narrow the focus to one of those three areas, either thoughtful work, high-level questioning, or academic discussion, instead of trying to tackle all three at once. When you look at the rubric that's in the board packet, it is very complex. And to try and tackle all of it at one time would be overwhelming for anyone, and it would end up in an improvement effort that didn't go anywhere. So we really wanted them to narrow that focus, and so that then they could dive deeply into the professional learning and see some improvements. So this is an example of data that was shared with our schools. So this is an example of high-level questioning data. When we look at high-level questioning, we're looking at two areas: student learning and instructional design. So student learning is what you see taking place in the classroom. Instructional design you also see in the classroom, but it also goes into how the teacher planned their lesson. So let me give you just a little bit of a color coding for these graphs. So the purple areas means that during that observation period in rounds, high-level questioning was not observed. May not be a good or a bad thing, but it was not observed. The red would fall into the beginning stages of development according to the rubric. The yellow would be emerging, so they're starting to move along the level of implementation. Next comes green, which is developed, and blue, which you can see there's not very much blue at all, would be well developed. So in this particular graph on the left, you see two bars. The bar to the left is an individual school's results, and next to it is the district all schools results. So it allowed schools to look at their results compared to the district overall. Okay, and what this sample school noticed is that they didn't see any developed or well-developed practices in student or high-level questioning student learning. So this is a school who's targeting high-level questioning as their area of improvement. So just to give you a little bit more, this blows a portion of the rubric up for you. So on that rubric that's included in your board packet, when you look at high-level questioning, what we're hoping to see in classrooms, the developed and well-developed implementation, you're going to see that the ownership of asking and answering questions falls very much on the student. Students are giving complex answers. They're asking complex questions of each other. They're generating questions to drive the learning, and the teacher becomes more of a facilitator. What you would have seen in classrooms where it was beginning or emerging, you would see a lot more the teacher asking a basic recall or retell question and then calling on one student to answer, maybe a couple of students. But it doesn't hold all students responsible for participating in the discussion and answering the questions. As you move into developed and well-developed, the expectation changes and all students are expected to participate and answer all questions with a variety of different instructional strategies. So the way that our buildings have tackled going back to work on increasing the rigor in our classrooms is through two primary means. The first is our late arrivals. Buildings with principals and our instructional coaches are doing work in the buildings to increase that, and you're going to see an example of that in just a moment. Another area that we use to improve the rigor is working with our instructional coaches. So our instructional coaches have engaged in learning to more deeply understand the rigor rubric, and also our coaches at one of our last meetings spent the afternoon developing some structured protocols to go back to grade level and departments and work on looking at lesson plans, looking at unit plans, and how they could increase the rigor of the questions that take place in the classroom. So now I'm going to show you a video clip that, there you go, that's going to take us through the process of rounds.
We're going to kind of come up with a common definition together of what rigor is first, and then how can we increase it through high-level questioning specifically. The words that are coming through are understanding, engagement, depth, stretching students' thinking, interesting, pushing, challenging, curiosity. Right? And so really I want us to start thinking about it in that way. Yes, there are some things about it that are stressful, and I totally get that. But when we get down to the essence of what it means to add rigor into our instruction, it's not a bad thing. It's asking kids to be engaged, to think critically, to think outside the box, to create, to stretch their thinking and encourage them, to get them to a new level of depth.
Instructional rounds are when groups of principals and district office leadership get together and we visit a building and we visit classrooms, and we use the rigor relevance rubric to talk about what we see students and teachers doing and to look at some of that data together, and then it helps give our building a focus. We look at thoughtful work, academic discussion, and high-level questioning, and when we get our building rubric, we share that with our staff, and it gives us a focus for what we want to work on and continue to get better at.
I love that they were doing some teaching, some peer teaching. They each had their problems.
So they jigsawed it, and they were each teaching each other a problem.
Okay. They definitely were justifying their thinking.
Mm-hmm.
They were going back and forth, but I'm not sure how many questions I heard.
Right. Yeah.
they didn't really ask each other questions. They more just showed each other.
Yes.
Yeah.
So we do our rounds in rounds. So once we finish our visits, we'll look at all the data together and really analyze and synthesize that. We'll take it back to our buildings again, and then we'll go through our third round later this spring. But one of the benefits of instructional rounds is that it gives opportunities for principals and district office leaders to talk together about what we're seeing in buildings. So we can ask each other questions. Sometimes one of us might notice something that somebody else doesn't. So it's an opportunity for us to talk about professional practice and instructional practice as well. We get the perspective from other district office leaders and other building principals for what they see in our school. So it gives us an opportunity to celebrate the things that we're doing really well and gives us perspective and focus for moving forward.
So I want to give just a little brief disclaimer. You may have seen as Pia, our coach at Jefferson, was leading the professional development, you might have noticed teachers on their phones and on their laptops, and I don't want to give the impression that our teachers are not engaged. They were actually participating in answering a question using an app where then their responses were collected in a word cloud. So that's what they were doing on their devices. So I just don't want anyone to think that our teachers spend their PD time on their phones and on their laptops doing something different. So, and thank you, Kate, for your work going out and getting all that footage and pulling it together. So moving forward, because rigor is such a complex concept for everyone to wrap their heads around, and there are many layers to the work, we're going to continue through next year with that as our focus. As we look at our next set of data, which we've just finished collecting, we'll really be looking at those benchmark schools that have showed marked improvement, and we're going to be asking them to share their professional learning plans with their peers and some of the things that they've done. Our coaches will certainly continue to facilitate professional learning in our PLCs. Something that's not on here that also has really been a huge benefit, knowing that we have 5 brand new principals in the district this year, having this opportunity to be in a rounds group with colleagues and calibrating their practice with each other really helps maintain the bar of excellence that we're looking for in the district. Principals, especially at the elementary school, all but 2 don't have an assistant principal. So they're on their own in their own island. And so having this opportunity to really be with their peers, to look at instructional practices, to ensure that we're all looking at things the same way, really helps us maintain some excellence. And I'd be happy to take any questions. And there's no way that will take an hour and a half.
Are there any comments or questions? No. Thanks for the update. And
you're welcome.
Keeping us informed on this.
Thanks.
Thank you. Okay, Mark Cohen will present high school instructional materials for next school year.
Good evening. I just had a very short list of materials to present from York High School for adoption for next year to be put on display. There are 5 courses that are looking at adopting new materials. And I'll just briefly summarize each one. Calculus 2 and Calculus 3 are going to be new courses for us next year with changes in math that happened a number of years ago in REACH. Now those students are juniors, but they're taking our top-level calculus courses and they need somewhere to go next. So we're adopting a ACP book. It's used by Indiana University for their Calculus 2 and Calculus 3 courses. We'd like to put that on display. The Food and Restaurant Management course uses a certification system called ServSafe that's part of their dual credit program with College of DuPage. Every 4 or 5 years, those manuals are updated. This manual happens to be a little bit more substantial. It's actually going from 10 to 15 chapters, but we're just essentially adopting the College of DuPage text that goes along with industry certification. We have the Automotive Tech and Automotive Diagnostics book that's also being updated. The last time a book was updated was 5 years ago, and clearly technology in automobiles has advanced a little bit since then, so it's an updated version of onboard diagnostics, etc. College literacy, that course is a research and writing course by definition, and the text that they had used as a modern example of research was from 2001. And so they've selected a piece called Evicted, which is a New York Times bestseller, but it is a documentary of research conducted, of journalism that was conducted on poverty in urban areas, and it's done as an exemplar, so they're updating, just trying to use a more up-to-date resource. And finally, our American Studies class is an interdisciplinary course that was approved last fall. They're adopting 5 novels that are going to be used to tie in themes from English 11 with events that took place over the course of U.S. history. So these novels are, some of them are, these are mostly optional choices. There are several that cover the same period of time, but they all revolve around themes that overlap between the English and social science courses. So we'd like your permission to put those on display for 30 days prior to adoption. I'm not sure if you have any questions about any of those materials.
Thinking. Okay, go ahead, Kara.
So I think I've said this before, but I have to say it again. When these materials are being considered, is the cost of the materials being considered? Since families have to purchase these things, and especially when you buy a new, for instance, math book, those are significant. So just are those conversations happening at the high school when these materials are chosen?
They are. They happen in IAC. They happen on a frequent basis. And next month we're going to talk a little bit more about the MLI process, the Mobile Learning Initiative, where we've introduced Chromebooks. When we had our Finance Committee meeting, Chris just asked us to kind of revisit that process and talk about where we're at in terms of trying to eliminate the needs for those resources. The college literacy and American studies materials are novels that are relatively low cost and are available through Beck's. The other 3, we really don't have a lot of choice in the matter. The Calculus 2 and Calc 3 courses are through ACP. We adopt the book that they adopt. Food and Restaurant Management, that's a dual credit opportunity with COD, and that ServSafe certification, that is the certification that our students need if they want to transfer then to a culinary arts program at CRD or beyond. That's for our La Brigade students. And the automotive tech classes, same thing. Those are aligned with COD and their automotive programs that lead to an ASE certification. But yes, we are going to keep a very close eye on that.
I mean, some of the math classes have 2 math books. So this is 1, right?
Not anymore. 1.
1, okay. Are there any other questions on the classes? Okay, thanks. Okay, Chris, Finance Committee report. Chris and Chris.
You gonna help me with this?
We had 3 items on the agenda. The first item was the February monthly financial report. We talked about, on the revenue side, just the timing of a few different things. The first one, property taxes. The county is going to distribute the prepayment of property taxes. The taxpayers that prepaid their 2017 taxes in December, those are going to come out mid-May. So that's a significant change from what's happened in the past. We've never collected property taxes in May before, but we will get that distribution in May. So that's going to push some property taxes that we would have expected to receive in the fall into May. So that's just, it's a timing difference. So it inflates the revenue in May, and then it'll deflate the revenue in September. The other thing on the revenue side is the the state grants. This year, there's the new evidence-based model, which they've now, they've general state aid along with a few other mandated categoricals are all coming out of the general state aid line, which they make 2 payments a month, and they keep up with those payments. And therefore, the state revenues are ahead of schedule as well because of that evidence-based model. And then the other categorical payments that are not in the evidence-based model are transportation and private facility tuition. Those we've received the 2 payments from last year and the first payment from this year, so we've received 3 of those, which is what we had budgeted for. 1 more would mean we would exceed budget in that area. Again, that would be, so some revenues are being, revenues might be inflated because of that state funding timing issue. So that's what we talked about on the monthly financial report. Go ahead.
Yeah, do you just want to, the biggest issue in the bottom line for Chris is you're going to see that this fiscal year, which ends on June 30th, could potentially have significantly more revenue in it, and that'll reverse out in next fiscal year. So when you get the budget for next year, depending on how much of the, say the property tax payments come in June 1 and September 1. And so depending on how that split goes, it's going to split our fiscal year. So you almost have to look at this year and next year together.
Right.
Because the budget will probably be negative next year, but you have to take part of this year and count it. So I just want to give everybody's heads up that.
Is the county going to tell you how, how much of your total expected revenue is coming in this prepaid property tax, so at least you could do a little accrual work and kind of figure that out?
Well, as far as I know, we're going to get the money in May, and we'll know in May.
They're just going to send you a check or wire the money into the district's bank account and not give you any other information.
Well, it will be that, as far as I know, now this has never been done before, it's going to be the prepayments.
So you know what your levy was, Jim. So you just take the total levy, subtract the amount that comes in May and June 1st, and you'll know what's supposed to be left.
Yeah, all right.
There needs to be a footnote on the financial presentations, absolutely.
This impacts the cash basis, but the audit, the audit does 50% of the extension in one fiscal year and 50% in the other fiscal year. So the audit will be more smooth on the revenue side, the audited revenues. So that is the monthly financial report. The second item on the agenda was the facility rental usage agreement for next year. As we've done in the past, we increased it by CPI, 2.1%, and there was just a minor tweak on the language on reservations. And then the other thing, the last item we had on the agenda was student fees. The pre-K through 8, there's an increase, and as we've done in the past, the fees pre-K through 8 are based on the actual cost of the consumed goods in the classroom, and so pre-K is increased $12, kindergarten increased $12, grades 1 through 5 are down $9, 6 through 8 are up $12. And then the grade 6 instrumental music is reduced from $150 to $30 because that will be only once a week in the morning for grade 6. 7th and 8th will remain at $150, and then vocal music will be $30 for grade 6, and then grade 7 and 8 will be $65. And then we talked about the track and or the athletics at the middle school. You want to talk about that at all, Chris?
Yeah, I mean, breaking this down into three pieces, there's the school fees related to the academic side, there's the activity fees, and then there's the athletic fees. And I think the athletic fees were where that conversation became became necessary to bring this to the board. I mean, it's been a long time since we've looked at these, and it's a good time to kind of look back at policy and how we do this. Just for process, the conversation today, I think, when we had the discussion, would be to gather questions that need to be answered around fees. I think we can talk about in some broad brush strokes some ideas and opportunities around how we address fees. The administration will do some work on that, come back on April 10th with a more definitive discussion around the actual fees and what they look like based upon the feedback we gave them and the questions today that we asked them to answer. So they're not going to have necessarily answers to all the questions. I told them I was sure that you guys would have plenty, and so we would do this tonight. April 10th, we'll talk about it again. April 24th would be the approval. So tonight, the purpose is to basically understand the parameters and kind of give some direction to the administration in putting together or tweaking our policy on fees. So with that, Chris,
So on the middle schools, athletics, we have cross country and track have been $40, and basketball and volleyball have been $70. So we have different options as far as percent of the cost, the average cost per participant for the sports, and there's two tiers in middle school. It's the cross country and track grouped together. Those are the lower of the 8 sports. Those are the lower cost per participant because there's such a large number of participants in cross country and track. And then the basketball and volleyball are tier 2. So the options we laid out were 20%, 25%, 30%, 40%, 50%, which as I said, currently we're $40 and $70. The option 2 of 25% is $30 and $100. And that is 25% when the current structure of $40 and $70 is 26% of the expenses. Then, so that's one question, and then the other one is the fee waiver. And so if historically we have not waived fees for extracurricular activities for athletics because they were considered optional or extra, and so those fees were not waived. So if we were to waive those fees, then we included what, you know, in the different options, how the revenues would compare to the current structure with those options. Go ahead.
Sure.
Can I just ask a quick, can you just clarify the fee waiver on what population that would affect, or possibly?
Fee waiver are the low-income students. We use the federal guidelines for free lunch in order to determine fee waiver, and income is verified for fee waiver to meet that criteria.
And Chris, let me say, I mean, I think the question, the discussion at the Finance Committee and trying to help frame the conversation for the board table was around, you know, on one end, keeping fees, you know, how much of the extracurricular activities should be funded by the taxpayer versus the user. And then what is a fair way to approach that? We talked about everything from a tiered structure to a flat fee for everybody that plays a sport, which would cross-subsidize other sports. How do activity fees go into this as well? I think we generally agreed that having kids in activities is better and has a positive impact on their academic performance. So, I mean, that was a question, I think, rather than just setting fees, we as a board should consciously, decide what we want to do. And then one of the other strategies, I think, was, do you keep the fees relatively low and waive a limited number of them, or do you raise them significantly higher to cover a greater cost, but then provide greater relief to the folks that can't afford it, and how you would do that? And those were some of the questions that had come up, but I wanted to open that up to all of you guys.
One piece is that how we compare with other comparable districts, we do about the same thing as everybody else does. So just so that you have a frame of reference of what other districts do.
Well, actually, the other comparables do waive the athletic fees.
I'm sorry, yeah. I meant the cost that we were talking about, yeah.
But I think, and I think Mark was involved in the conversation too, and he had some insight too there, is just options. I think laying out for the board what the options are based upon what comparables do, what should we think about changing, what's fair and equitable. So again, I think we're asking the board to give direction to the administration to come back to the next meeting. I think Chris threw out some options here. Do you want to just take an option and do it? Do you want to see other things? What questions do you have as it pertains to fees and our policy on fees that you would like to see addressed at the conversation at the next board meeting?
So thank you, and I like the way this is laid out, and I particularly appreciate the plan, so we know when we need to make a decision. So thank you for that. One of the things that I would like to get additional information on is, I know they have the category, the free and reduced lunch and their income verification. I know we have approximates about what that looks like, that percentage, what that percentage is, but have a better understanding what that percentage is. And I also would like to better understand, athletics is one piece, but there's also fees for other extracurriculars activities, which include music and those other groups. What we do with music, for example, do we waive fees for that group? So I think those are some of the things that I'd like to know, so we're making a good comparison, particularly for our middle school.
So that is on the document. That if you look at the bottom section, it says fees waived for students receiving financial assistance, and it says the registration fees, instrumental music, vocal music, technology fee, field trip, admission, transportation.
So let me be sure I understand. So these so we are currently waiving music fees. Mm-hmm. So that includes whether middle school I'm in the choir. That includes if I'm in the choir or have private or have music lessons. That's all included, and those fees are all waived. Okay. Are there other fees in the middle school besides, all I can think of right now, extra fees are, yeah.
Clubs are $10. The clubs are $10?
Yes.
Mm-hmm. So those fees are not included. Is that a correct statement?
Those fees are now waived.
Okay. Okay. All right. So thank you for that clarification. And right now we have no waiver of fees for our free and reduced income, and I'd just be curious what that percent is, what that percent of population is, and what that might do.
So School districts are allowed to have a different process for free and reduced lunch than for fee waiver, and that's what we have, as lots of districts do. Free and reduced lunch, there is no verification of income. Fee waivers, there is verification of income, and that's a significant point.
So when, I want to make sure I understand, a significant point, so that's a significant amount of extra resources?
It's different.
Okay, and what would it take to do that?
To do what?
Significant, to verify the fees. Is that a significant resource?
So we verify income for fee waivers.
Okay.
For students that meet the criteria under the federal income guidelines for free lunch.
I heard you say something, and maybe I took it differently. You said, I'm wondering for the district, is that a significant resource, additional resource for verification for these fee waivers, is a question.
I don't understand the question.
Okay.
I think Margaret's just wondering what does it cost the district in terms of resources to verify somebody's income, and if you say that applies to 200 students, is that a significant amount of money that we're spending to verify somebody's income?
People have a paperwork process. Ellen helps them with that. If they have questions about it, she'll explain to them where to get the forms. She'll give them the forms, whatever. They turn it in to her, and they have to have the appropriate documents to go along with it. And if they...
No, my staff does all the fee waivers.
Oh, I just get the appeals.
You get all the appeals.
Okay, there you go. I get the appeals. So like his, if they don't like the answer they get from him, they go to me.
Right.
Distinguish between fee waivers, did you distinguish between fee waivers and free and reduced lunch? Right. So fee waivers are income verified group.
Right.
And then there's a separate group which is free and reduced lunch, which includes fee waiver people plus more.
So the income guidelines are the same for free, not reduced. Income guidelines are the same whether it's fee waiver or free lunch. But in fee waivers, we verify the income.
Oh, so when you get to the point where you go into activities, you verify the income. Okay.
For fee waivers, it's a separate process where income is verified.
Okay. And I mean, this starts to get into a little bit into the high school, but I mean, from a policy standpoint, it's not that different as far as our approach. Where there's a group, I think, that's above the official qualifying fee waiver folks that have hardship. And I think to date, WYSIT has been spending money to help those kids. And so the question would be that if the fees went up additionally, how do you help those kids? And I think the issue with WYSIT was that they did something we couldn't do because we were saying that we just did fee waivers because it kept us from making judgments. Because there were a set of guidelines for fee waivers that we followed, right? And so the WYSIT had a group that evaluated other factors and made decisions on helping folks that if we started, it became more subjective. Is that?
But historically, we haven't waived athletic fees. So if we started waiving, the need would be less because the fees are waived.
For some folks, but not necessarily everyone, right?
For the people that meet the criteria.
That meet the criteria. What I'm saying is that criteria, if it's only for fee waiver / free lunch, federal guidelines that are set up that are not written by us, that we follow. But then there's a group that has a little more income than that still may be hurt significantly by increased fees that WYSIT had been helping. And I think I recall a discussion when WYSIT came into being about whether we could help those folks or not. And I think the issue was that it became more judgmental on our part that started to open a can of worms. And my question is just, how do you deal with those folks that that are still going to be, hurt significantly by this that don't necessarily qualify for a free lunch if you were to raise the fees.
And one of the other things, and I was involved in the formation of YSET. YSET did look at, it looked at groups that were above the free lunch income levels and decided if it could still help. All right. My question is, I'm not sure. I don't know that YSET, I don't know how active it is currently and whether it's still doing any fundraising and would be able to help out. So that's one question. Are there other options if we don't have a fee waiver? Are there other options in the community already established that could facilitate this process? If YSET has gone away, I think that's a bigger issue that we need to think about.
Yeah, my understanding is that YSET does no longer exist. And Mark can have clarification on that from the high school at the April board meeting, but I do not believe that they are any longer active.
I do know that some other districts, the athletic boosters, do fund that situation.
Chris, do you know any situations where the athletic fees are waived based on a criteria other than by the district, other than by free lunch criteria? That's that's probably an easier one to point to.
I noticed that Wheaton is doing free lunch and reduced rates for reduced, which is a higher income than the free.
So do we make a determination on eligibility for reduced lunch, and what is that process?
No verification.
So they sign an affidavit saying that they meet certain guidelines?
They complete a form.
They complete a form.
And write down their income.
Okay. So, I mean, we theoretically could use that as what we base waivers off of, except that brings in, I mean, there's a lot of trust at that point that we would have to have a conversation around. But I'm just trying to, again, the point of this conversation was start to put the Legos on the table to see how we can snap them together to form a fair policy.
Does this have to be, or do other school districts, is it an all or nothing, meaning it's waived, or if you are on a fee waiver, can you have pay half of the fee?
I've not seen that.
Okay, so it's just all or nothing.
Well, the one that I just said was Wheaton said they had a reduced rate if you met the reduced criteria.
Okay.
And had a free if you met the free criteria.
Okay. And then can you just clarify one thing on your, it's the sheet that is the analysis of middle school athletic fees. What are the numbers in parentheses? Like at the bottom where it says fee waiver, like 39,000.
That's comparing to the current revenue structure.
Okay.
So at the
so if you did
20% with a fee waiver, it would be a reduction of 15,284 of revenues.
Okay. All right.
Can I ask whoever's appropriate to approach the boosters, the athletic boosters, and see if they have a willingness to help those kids that may not qualify for fee waivers, but yet it's a financial hardship for their family?
I will talk to, or Mark, one of the two of us, will talk to Aaron at the high school tomorrow. I assume that Rob Wagner would be the person to approach the boosters, but we can make that request and see what they say.
It would also be helpful for me in gathering this information. Thank you for the comparatives. If we have some feedback on some of these options that are laid out, what the school administration's thoughts on which of these options would best serve their populations.
Well, you want us to make a recommendation on what?
Yeah. So let me clarify and make it. I'll state it as clear as I can. An example for York. Please talk with Rob Wagner, Athletic Department, and share this information. What is being discussed? What are his thoughts on how this would work with the athletic community? So that's as clear as I can make it, I think.
I think, I'm not so sure at that point that, I'm making the statement because I want to make sure, I think by making the statement, I'll know if I'm going in the right direction to answer your question. I don't think, once the fee waiver process is verified and the student is in the system, the athletic department will need to, they would have a list of the kids that don't have to pay the fee, and they would know who to collect from and who not to collect from. So they wouldn't actually, I don't think, be doing any verifying or whatever.
I'm not asking them to verify. I'm saying since they work with this population, what are their thoughts on what would best serve this population? They work very closely with the athletic population. What are their thoughts on, if there's no fee waiver now, how many people might benefit from a fee waiver, since they also work with very closely with other athletic departments across our conference, and I'm sure across the state. What have they seen that works best? So as much information, just like we got those comparables from the other district, let's look internally and let's do what are we seeing from those people who are closest to the issues. What are they seeing and what might they recommend? That's what I'm asking.
So they were, what did we say at the Finance Committee, about 8%?
Yes.
So we're just translating, we don't know for sure exactly which kids, but we're estimating an 8% number of the kids that participate, but it might actually be lower than that if those kids aren't going out because they can't come up with the money. And so I'm not sure. It'll be very anecdotal because I'm not sure how they'll be able to say it. I'm sure that they will tell you that they would say that they think, I know that the high school believes that we should waive fees. I could tell you that I know that they think that. But I will try to see what type of specific thoughts they have. We can do that.
Thank you.
And another question would just be, we have tiers. Are these something that you think's fair? That what they try to do is they try to align cost to the fee to a percentage of cost. I think if you do this on the back of the envelope, if you just took the total revenue and divided it by the 1,918 and a half kids in the high school program, I think it's like $155 flat. So, that would end up cross-subsidizing some sports with other sports. But should it matter? I don't know. I have personal opinions on that, but I just wanted the board to weigh in on what your guys' thoughts are rather than just throwing a schedule up and approving it.
I think the fees, okay. I think the community is very sensitive to fees, so raising fees is going to be, take a lot of community engagement, or it wouldn't be easy. I'm just taking like the middle school fee for basketball. It's $70 right now. I think that season is about 5 weeks long, and you're going to raise it. If you raise it more, that's just one example. It's a very, very short season. So, I just see that it could be problematic trying to raise fees because people are very sensitive to it, and then look at the the length of the season. Some are 4 months, some are 4 or 5 weeks. So that's another variable to look at.
Shannon, do you happen to know what the fee for Y-ball is?
No, I don't.
I don't either, but I think it's significantly more than $70.
But I think for school fees, people, I talked to a lot of parents, they're very sensitive to school fees. We just heard from the lacrosse parents that they want lower fees, even though some of them have spent a lot of money on one tournament. So it's when it's attached to the school, I get a lot of feedback. It's a little different.
So you mentioned the tier, system, and I'm not sure exactly how I feel overall, but something to consider is that, to have an athletic program, you have to have an athletic director. You have to have all these pieces that make an athletic program successful more than just, if we had one sport and the cost of that one sport. So I do feel like there's like a minimum that everybody kind of contributes to make the athletic program what it is. And then maybe, beyond that, some sports are, obviously cross country is cheaper than, I don't know, all other sports.
Right, and that's kind of the argument for the tiered structure, right? Is that there's some baseline that everybody pays, and then the folks in the more expensive sports pay more. Again, I just did a back of the envelope for the middle school for the kind of the 25% option 2 tiers, the break even basically. And if you took the $57,000 and divided it by the 1,200 kids, it's like $50 would be a flat. So some pay 30 now, some pay 100, or it'd be 50 for everybody. The question is does the 100 impact participation in the sport for 100? Again, these are policy questions. That's what we're supposed to be talking about.
We talked about this in the committee. I'll just say it here. I like the 2 tiers in the middle school where the non-cut sports that throw a broader net have one level, and the cut sports that benefit a smaller number of kids have a different level, but both of them are the same approximation of, or the same percentage of cost. And I think that's a very fair way to go about it.
I agree. Is that the right direction we want to give Mark to come and Chris to come back with at the next meeting, is to stick with the tiered structure then?
I think that structure works for middle school. So I'm agreeing with John, because I hadn't thought about the cut versus non-cut. I think when you look at high school, it's a little more blended, it's a little more complex. There's more tiers. So example, track boys is in one tier and track girls is in another tier. So I think that's something that we need to kind of work through. Or we just need to understand, and I know that's based off the level of participation. I know it's based off the level of participation. So I understand that, but I think we just need to be more aware of that. I think there's also some sports that, so example, I'm pointing to Dave because I'm not a baseball expert, but I know that all those bats that have to be purchased, those are a significant cost that go above any fee that is paid by the individual students. So some of those fees that we're not seeing are very, they cost a lot. There's a lot of additional costs to participating in a sport other than the fee that's paid here.
We try to keep the boys and the girls in the same tier. Which ones did you say?
The cross country hasn't been historically.
Girls track and boys track.
Those are in this tier 1.
They are in this sheet, but I think that girls cross country was 150 and boys cross country was 125.
Yes.
Oh, in previous
years.
Yeah. This version,
we're trying to true that up.
The same.
Yeah, we're trying to sync that up, recognizing exactly that kind of.
We made sure the boys and the girls were in the same tier.
Yeah.
That's why you threw me there, because I thought I had it.
Okay, so has this gone into effect yet?
No.
Okay, so, okay.
Not till the 24th after we vote on whatever it ends up being.
All right, so then the girls' track could pay less.
Same as boys.
Okay, but less than they've already paid already, so, because they started in January.
It depends on what option we pick.
But anyway, so I'm glad that these things are so I see softball and baseball are now in the same grouping, right? Softball and baseball? Nope. I don't see, where's baseball? Did I miss?
Baseball's in tier 2, so no, they are not the same.
Okay, so are baseball and softball different?
In my opinion.
From a math perspective, Chris did a grid based upon percentage of total cost. So these are the questions we need to have as to whether we want to tweak within that. But from a math perspective, yes, they're very different because there's different participations. And that's why it leads it to a different, but Chris did a math problem here. So they're there. So, if that's a desire to have sports treated, again, this is a policy question. Do you want the boys and the girls sports treated the same from a fee perspective regardless of cost? That would be direction that they would need to have. But again, our policy to date had been to try to cover cost, and over years it had kind of gotten out of whack, but it had always been as a percentage of cost.
Why would the boys and girls sports have different costs if the opportunities are the same?
Less girls out for softball. The numbers aren't as high.
Less girls out for track. The numbers would be lower than the number of boys that are out for track and/or cross country.
I wasn't arguing with anybody. I was just answering John's question.
If it's a no cut, then the cost differentiation is a result of participation, more or less.
I would say the participation, it's in most of these, it comes down to the number of participants compared to the number of coaches, the ratio there, so the more the participants, the less it costs generally.
Right, but disparate participation results only in the non-cuts, right?
No, I would say it's the number of participants.
No, but what I'm saying is we determine the number of participants by setting cut levels, and baseball and softball should be substantially equivalent, shouldn't they?
Only depends on how many participants there are.
Well, we can make them the same if we want, is what I'm saying.
Well, in essence, I think you could probably do whatever you want, but the girls' softball numbers, I think lacrosse has cut into some of our participation in some other sports. And so, I mean, it's just the softball, I think that, for instance, last year softball was able to have, and I know this because my daughter plays, but I think that they were able to have a freshman team that was independent, play an independent schedule. I don't think they can this year. I don't think they have enough kids. I think they have to combine freshman and sophomore into one level. I think. I might not be right. But the bottom line is that the softball numbers are not equivalent to baseball.
And I think when you get into sports like cross country, I mean, you do have sports that lend themselves to, and God bless Joe Newton for setting this program up, that had this range of state champions and the kids that took, as long as I would take to run the race. And they can all run together, and there's that group. But, if you create another baseball team or softball team to increase the numbers and they're not competitive and they get killed every time they go out, that's not helpful either. So, I think if you want to make the numbers bigger, you can add teams, but if they're not competitive, that's the other piece of it. It's not easy. But I think we're looking for direction to these guys to come back with something to talk about. I think, just to put this first one to bed here, the middle school, it sounds like the two-tiered option, which is option 2, which is basically the current status quo with just some rejiggering. Chris, if I get this right? Or it's actually not. The tiers stay the same. The costs are adjusted to align the percentages better. So tier 1 actually goes down and tier 2 goes up.
Right.
And then, so I guess that's the first question. Are you okay with what's in what tier and the fee levels? And then the second is just fee waiver and how do we handle it? And I think, the question for discussion and to think about, and I mean, we're going to talk about this again in the next meeting, is just whether, I think there's 2 levels. There's the fee waiver that is already determined in the district, and then there's what can we do for folks that don't quite make that. So does that give you direction enough on the middle school to come back with something?
You're thinking, so at the next meeting, when I'm presenting, I would, at the middle school level, present option 2. Is that what we're saying? Because that is 25%, and we're currently collecting about 26%. So it's very similar to the current revenue structure.
So no increase in fees. This is just a cheering up to get a more consistent percentage of cost absorbed. Is that
The option 2, what we have now, or?
No, what you.
But it's just,
So
some sports are spending more.
What you have now is 40 and 70.
So currently we're at 40 to 70. Option 2 would be 30 and 100.
I think the 100 is too big a jump, personally, but from 80?
70.
From 70.
70 to 100.
I mean, you can stick with 40 and 70 and bump everything $5 or something and be done with it if you want to. In the middle school, it's probably a little easier to deal with because there's a fewer number of sports. When you get to the high school, it becomes, there are some significant outliers that need to be adjusted. But again, I mean, is that, I think wherever we end up here, we'll come back, and after you sleep on it for a while, we can talk about it again. But so it sounds like 40 and 70 or 45 and 75 are going to be the numbers.
Although, I'm going to say what I shared in the committee is, can we transition instead of having a flash cut of these are the new numbers, to Kara's point of moving from 70 to 100? Kind of the same concept that we did with facilities fees, you know what I mean? That it's, we increase it by CPI, you know what I mean?
Well,
So
I mean,
it's
sure, you
a
could put that
gradual
concept,
increase.
you
So
could put that
was just
concept in
something-
here as well. I
Yep,
mean, if you
so-
just wanted to bump them, I don't know. I mean, what do you guys want to do?
I think it should go to cost. I don't think the percentage that we cover should depend on a kid's athletic ability. So the percentage should be the same in the cut and the non-cut sports.
But John, then that would end up like some fees could be over $300. Like for York, if you take, the bottom would be $310 if everyone contributed 25%. It would be option 2.
Well, I mean, do we want certain student athletes' families to support other student athletes' families in a differing percentage?
So as far as the high school is concerned, we're currently covering 17.4% of the expenditures. So to say close to that at the high school would be, it could be option 1, which is 20%, because we're currently covering 17.4%. Does that make sense? And so that with without the fee waiver at 20% is an increase in revenue of $22,000. With the fee waiver, it's slightly down $686.
You know I got. Okay. I think you might have said this and you don't necessarily have to do this tonight, but I would like to see what if you just said, okay, you're in a sport in the middle school, it doesn't matter what the sport is, and it's, 20%, like, or, what, for 20%, 25%, 30%, what is the flat rate, basically, if you had the same fee for everybody?
Easy enough. I guess, the downside of that theory is the cross-country kids have to pay a lot more percentage of the cost per participant than the basketball kids.
So for option one, I did the math. It's 300 grand of fee revenue, and it's 1,918 kids and a half kids. I'm not sure who the half kid is. And it's like $155.
Wow.
For everybody. So you're gonna, you're gonna get some.
That's for high school.
That's just the high school. So I didn't. The middle school's like $50. So.
What's the lowest in the high school fee now?
125. Right, but as a policy, you're going to be subsidizing some, but to John's point, does it matter what sport the kid goes out? Should we just have a flat fee for the kids to go play? I don't know.
I think we even things out with our tax levy, and I don't think we do it with fees. And so the benefit, or the percentage that each family pays for the costs that they cause the district to incur should be similar. And so, no, we can't have a specific one, but we should have tiers that generally reflect it. I think 2 tiers is enough at middle school, and I would have trouble going less than what we currently have, 5 tiers, 4 tiers in the high school. I'd have trouble reducing the number of tiers. It certainly would oppose doing 1 tier because that's some families supporting through their fees other families' athletic pursuits, and I think we do that with the tax levy, not with fees.
I agree. I like having the tiers. I just want to watch that highest tier to make sure that it doesn't go too high. Like, I think 25% at the high school, the highest tier, highest cost would be 310. That's to me, that's too high. So maybe what Chris Welton's saying, do the 20%, and then that highest fee doesn't seem too high.
And then do you want to true up girls and boys sports and make sure they're in the same tier? You're getting away from the general principle that says that's reflective of cost, but there's some equity question.
A lot of those costs are the results of decisions that we make and things that we make different between them. I think we start out with the point that they should be the same.
So guys, direction.
And you're not determining the tier by cost.
For a few exceptions. I'm just saying there's competing objectives here. The question is what does the board feel?
Put their costs together, both in the same, put their costs together, and then do the same percentage you do in the other tiers so that they wind up in the same tier. They're only different because you choose to look at them differently.
I'd like to think more about that one. I didn't.
Sure. Do you want to see a version that has them paired up?
That would be, yeah. Mm-hmm.
And not? I can think about it. I guess it's like, where do you draw the line? Because you're going to get some sports that only have boys sports or only have girls, and then they can say, well, why does my? Let's think about it. Chris, can you just pair up sports and give us a version with that, and then a version, I think, with option 1?
It only impacts 3 sports.
And
I tried to do it. Which ones? I see water polo is different.
Swimming is different.
Swimming and water polo.
And then the baseball, softball.
Softball.
Those were the three.
Baseball and softball are the same.
Not in your proposal. No.
No, I know they're two different tiers, but you think that they should be in the same tier.
that was the question we're going to have. I'm just curious about the impact it means if we took the boys and girls version of same sports and put them together.
All right.
We haven't made a decision on that. I think we just like to see it.
What do you think? It's a different sport.
He's a baseball guy, so I don't know, that's the issue. And then I think the other question we have for you guys is just if you guys could do some research on fee waivers and how, beyond just the free lunch cutoff, that we could accomplish helping kids. And if that's viable without getting ourselves in a lot of kind of judgment call situations.
The one last thing, and you talked about the maximum fee. Are we going to consider that? The maximum amount a family could, a fee cap or something?
Family cap.
So when we did the comparison of all the other districts, we have a $450 family cap at York. One district had it where they capped it at two sports. So if you played 3, you only paid 2. Only one other, and then the rest of them had no caps. You just paid them all. We were the only one with a $450 family cap.
And I guess my only thing, I think that's a question, do we want to continue the cap? Do we want to get rid of the cap? Or do we want to do some type of amendment to the cap? To me, those are, we need to make that decision, conscious decision.
St. Charles said they did the cap this year for the first time, which was 2 times. And it was so difficult for tracking that they are going back to no cap next year.
So I'm guessing you have to go to the participant level to figure out the impact of the cap or no cap. Do you have any idea what that cap costs us? And
no, it's all calculated by the support staff in the athletic department at York.
Okay. So, conversations for you guys to think about. If you have other thoughts on that, in the meantime, I think make sure you email Mr. Welton, and it'll show up on the board agenda again on the next meeting.
Can I ask one question? One question, Chris. How do we manage the family cap?
Like I said, it's done by the support staff in the athletic department at York. Then the other thing, Chris, we had an increase. The Algebra 2 is a course fee related to an ALEX license. ALEX is a computer adaptive assessment instructional tool that the College of DuPage uses for math course placement. Operating in partnership with COD, we have begun using the tool in our Algebra 2 classes to ensure that our students are receiving instruction and feedback that will earn them placement into credit-bearing math courses in college. So that's the $15 course fee in Algebra 2. And then the technology department was recommending $325 for the Chromebook because it's a little bit of a deluxe version. Is my that's my lingo. He's got all the details in the packet of the Chromebook specifications.
Oh, Chris, just Dave, if you want to weigh in on this, it is a higher end version, but the old version, if you'd have bought the same thing, doesn't run the software for all 4 years for the kids that would be buying it. So you're going to have to buy something else anyway.
Correct. So I think it would be a reasonable thing to purchase the same Chromebook again this coming year that we purchased this year, but in researching the end-of-life date published by the manufacturer and Google, I don't think that's wise because it's questionable as to what would happen the 4th year for those freshmen when they become seniors. So I think since that question mark is out there, I just don't think we should go there, honestly. So so we started looking at other models, and when you've got the performance of the current processors that are coming out, and as well as the features that are pretty common with the Chromebooks that are coming out these days, the touchscreen is a key piece. The freshmen we surveyed this year, 75% of the freshmen this year felt that the touchscreen helped with their learning, and 89% recommended that we buy a similar model for their incoming freshmen next year. So the feedback is that that's a valuable feature to have for them. So when you wrap it all up and you look at what's available, I do think we're just over that $300 mark of a purchase price. And that's with squeezing the vendor pretty hard to get the price down as far as we can. So that's the kind of the rationale. We can certainly consider lower cost options, but I think we're giving up some key features, which I really think for the students, if we could manage to provide that Chromebook or one like that with those features, I think they would benefit more.
And I think the other piece of the conversation there was just that we approved the Chromebook in connection with the MLI, and an update, before we go ahead and renew the mandate that everybody purchase one of these, to revisit how we're doing. I mean, I think, and Dave referenced that earlier tonight, that before the 24th, we're going to have a conversation, is that right, about MLI and about impact, because when this was sold to us before, there was aspects of it helps learning. Eventually, it's going to get rid of print text, although I think we've had our challenges with that to date. So, again, you're asking us to vote for something, but we wanted to revisit what it's being used for.
There'll be a technology presentation on April 10th that will be a two-part presentation. The first part will be on the instructional piece, and that will have to do with the conversation on open resources, as well as learning and teaching. We'll try to gather, we haven't done a program analysis on it yet, like we're trying to get into, but learning and teaching, we'll try to get some anecdotal data and as much qualitative and quantitative data as we can to try to explain to you some of the things that are going on in terms of how they're being used. For example, I know that there's a lot more writing going on in 4th and 5th grade, and some other things like that that we will be able to report to you. The second part of that will be Dave, and like the hardware, and the initial presentation of what he's suggesting we need to do for part of his budget cycle, which along with fees would be on the second April meeting for recommendations for approval.
Does that pretty much cover it, Chris?
That's all? Oh, okay. Thanks. Okay, we have 2 board meeting minutes. February 24th, 2018, that was the Saturday meeting, and then February 27th, 2018. Are there any comments for those 2 sets of minutes? Okay, hearing none, they'll be approved. Superintendent's consent agenda. Are there any items that a board member would like to remove from the consent agenda? Okay, go ahead.
I would like to remove item H from the consent agenda.
Okay, so I need a motion for the consent agenda for items A through G, I, and J.
I move that we approve the superintendent's consent agenda items A through G and I through J.
Second? Okay, moved by John, second by Kara. We'll do a roll call.
Mr. McDonough?
Yes.
Mrs. Caforio?
Yes.
Mr. Bloom?
Yes.
Mrs. Stufen?
Yes.
Dr. Harrell?
Yes.
Mr. Collins?
Yes.
Mrs. Ebner?
Yes, it's 7 ayes, no nays, that motion carries. I need a motion
I move that
about
the board.
H.
I move that the Board of Education approve the special education student transportation services and transportation services contract.
A second.
I second.
Okay, moved by John, second by Margaret. Is there discussion?
Yes, I was wondering if, Kathy, if you wouldn't mind just giving some additional details or background on this, please?
Sure. As you know, we're a member of the SACID Cooperative, and they do engage in a contract with a bus company, which is separate from our Cottage Hill company. We have a district contract with Cottage Hill that supplies our transportation needs for most of our students who are identified for special education. By SACID approving a new contract, each member district also needs to approve that contract. We've done this in the past. They did go to bid this year. They have not been satisfied with the previous vendor, so they wanted to go to bid. That vendor did bid, but they chose to go with this new vendor who is a Sunrise. So we have used the SACID transportation on a very small scale. Currently, we are anticipating needing to use it for 2 students next year. Again, Cottage Hill does meet most of our needs. Those 2 students, it's very specific to their services that they receive and the programs that they are in. So we as a school, or they're asking the school board to approve the new contract with Sunrise. By each member district approving it, it would allow each member district, if they chose to, sever ties with this vendor and not affect the relationship that the other member districts have with this vendor.
Thank you.
Mr. McDonough?
Yes.
Dr. Harrell?
Yes.
Mrs. Caforio?
Yes.
Mrs. Stufen?
Yes.
Mr. Bloom?
Yes.
Mr. Collins?
Yes.
Mrs. Ebner?
Yes, it's 7 ayes, no nays. That motion carries. Superintendent action items.
Okay, we have a recommendation to approve donations from Conrad Fisher, Emerson, Jackson, Lincoln, and York. These are consistent with policy 880, and the recommended action would be repeated in the motion. So what I'm going to do is just highlight a little bit from each of the schools that you see in the packet. The PTA has at Conrad Fisher approved 22 classroom teachers to provide 22 classroom teachers with a donation of $250 each for the purchase of classroom books in the total amount of $5,500. Emerson PTA, $750 toward enhancing the Emerson Library through the ability to purchase Illinois Reader's Choice nominee books. The Aidan Shea Foundation, this is Jackson. This was a student who passed away a couple years ago. They have been supporting the school in his name, and they're offering to donate $5,000 to the Jackson Library to go toward a 3D printer, about $2,000 of which are supplies. Lincoln PTA offered to donate $7,500 for the purchase of an outdoor classroom. This would include this supporting makerspace and STEAM activities. This is consistent with some of the things you've seen at board meetings with design, STEM, and other things like that. And this would also be flower boxes and other types of things included in that. Then the York Boosters offered to make a cash donation to purchase a new tent for the district. The total amount of that is $10,522.
And there's one motion for those. John, were you going to do that? Oh, go ahead.
Just real quickly, policy 880 requires that the donations not result in substantially different learning environments or resources. Just to confirm that, can you explain how, particularly when these things are for the donations of books, classroom books, can you explain how we keep that from creating a disparity?
Yes, I keep track of that, and for example, this year we worked on leveled guided reading libraries, so I had kept track of how much schools had gotten in donations from their PTA and made sure that that was equalized, as well as going further with Fisher this year, knowing that they also have to purchase books in Spanish. So I monitor it and then use our learning and teaching budget to fill in where we need to.
That's good to know. Thank you for the explanation. I'd move that the board approve acceptance of the donations from Conrad Fisher PTA in the amount of $5,500 for the purchase of classroom books, the Emerson School PTA in the amount of $750 for the purchase of books for the library, the Aidan Shea Foundation in the amount of $5,000 for the purchase of a 3D printer and books for the library, the Lincoln School PTA in the amount of $7,500 for the purchase of outdoor classroom, and the York Athletic Boosters in the amount of $10,522 for the purchase of a new tent. These donations are accepted in accordance with Policy 880, gifts to the district. And do we do the thank you before or after we vote on it? Okay.
I'll second that.
Moved by John, second by Margaret.
I'd like to thank these amazing organizations for what they do for their school communities. It's great to see this every time we see the very active school communities just making their place a better place to live, and we do make sure that every kid gets the same education in District 205. But it's wonderful to see this energy. Thank you.
Mr. McDonough, are you?
Sorry, go ahead.
Sorry. I just wanted to give a quick shout out to the Fisher PTA, who is a wonderful group of people who set as a goal this year to raise enough money that they would need board approval to make the donation to the school. They did such a great job. There's such positive energy there. I can't say enough good things. That's all I wanted to say.
And I just wanted to say a special thank you to the friends of Aidan, who passed away a few years ago, and just thank you for the gift to the district to keep his memory alive and that other students can enjoy in memory of him. So thank you so much for that.
Mr. McDonough?
Yes.
Dr. Harrell?
Yes.
Mr. Collins?
Yes.
Mrs. Caforio?
Yes.
Mrs. Stufen?
Yes.
Mr. Bloom?
Yes.
Mrs. Ebner?
Yes, it's 7 ayes, no nays. That motion passes. Freedom of Information Act requests. Bless you.
We received 4. 1 requesting certain student discipline information, which was denied. 1 requesting specific RFP information, which was partially granted and partially denied. 1 requesting specific bid information, which was granted. 1 requesting specific expense information, which was granted.
Board communications? Anything else to say? I know. Well, we only had 1 meeting this month, so this. Okay, action on closed session items. Approval of resolution authorizing notice of non-renewal to non-tenured teachers other than final year probationary teachers. Oh, sorry.
Instead of so moved, I will say that I move that the Board of Education adopt the resolution authorizing notice of non-renewal to non-tenured teachers other than final year probationary teachers.
I'll second.
Okay, moved by Karen, second by Margaret. Go ahead. do you want to explain? Should we have an explanation?
Yeah, if we can get our administrators to just explain what we're doing here. We do it every year, but I think it can't be explained enough.
I'll do my best to keep it brief. This is a process that takes place every year, usually at the March board meeting. Since I've been here, this is the only meeting that it takes place, at which it takes place. The action that you're taking tonight is confirming and approving the release of all part-time, non-tenured teachers, all teachers who were hired under a one-year contract, even if they're full-time, to fill in for somebody who is on a leave of absence. You are also approving any resignations that we've had this year. And in addition to that, if there were any probationary teachers, that's in year 1, 2, or 3. It also includes year 4, but there are different rules for year 4, so we don't include them on tonight's report if that's necessary. And you are, if they have resigned or if they are being released for the purposes of a lack of performance, so they're being non-renewed based on their evaluation ratings in consultation with their evaluators, those individuals are all being released tonight. The individuals who are part-time who are being released without any performance concerns may be rehired as necessary. The individuals who are here on a one-year contract, filling in for leave of absence, or if we had an extenuating circumstance, they are all eligible to be rehired by the district if we have open positions. Teachers who resigned a position not to avoid non-renewal, they are eligible for rehire, should they so choose to reapply. Teachers who resign to avoid a non-renewal notification are not eligible to be reemployed by the district. And teachers who were released for performance reasons are not eligible to be rehired by the district. This is something that takes place every year at this time, and it has absolutely nothing whatsoever to do with the layoff and recall process. This is a completely separate, once-a-year annual event.
Mrs. Stufen?
Yes.
Dr. Harrell?
Yes.
Mr. McDonough?
Yes.
Mr. Collins?
Yes.
Mrs. Gaforiel?
Yes.
Mr. Bloom?
Yes.
Mrs. Ebner?
Yes, it's 7 ayes, no nays. That motion passes. We did not have the student disciplinary case tonight, so that's not necessary to discuss. Upcoming meetings, Tuesday, April 10th, Board of Education meeting, and Tuesday, April 24th, Board of Education meeting. And we've reached the end of the agenda. I'll declare the meeting adjourned. Thank you.